So just to welcome you all and to go... Hi all again. So just to welcome you all and to say that the apologies for absence that we've had are Councillor Hamilton and Councillor Howcroft-Scott. Councillor Gurung is filling in for Councillor Howcroft-Scott, and Councillor Eddie Peake, who's not here yet, will be filling in for Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Spring, Councillor Pearce, Clive Mayling, who I believe has resigned, Carl Gurin-Hassett and Emma Sue Willows. And Councillor Jackson is running about half an hour late.
Thank you, Chair. We're just also, Councillor Lamas will be here and Councillor Anning, they're just running slightly late because of the traffic. Thank you.
So can I sign the record of the meeting held on the 14th as correct?
Agreed.
Okay. And I think there's no urgent matters other than to say that I'd like to advise you that the Clive Mayling, our Roman Catholic Church representative, has notified us that he's resigning from the committee due to retirement. He's been a member since 2013 and attended his first meeting in December 2013. And on behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank Clive for his hard work, valuable contribution and commitment over the years, and wish him a very happy retirement and all the best for his future. Thank you. And then just to ask if there's any DPIs, OSIs or whipping. No? Okay. In that case, then, if we move on to item 5, which is the meeting's theme of education and special educational needs and disability.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you an overview. Hopefully you can see the screen behind you in terms of some slides which have been shared with you in advance, and then we'll move over to questions. And we've got 3 reports for you this evening: the SEND Strategy Action Plan, the Post-16 Review and the SEND Self-Evaluation. So starting with the Strategy Action Plan. So the SEND strategy was developed last year. It outlines the joint areas ambitions. So it's a joint partnership strategy.
Could you just move the mic a little bit closer?
Sorry. Yeah. Is that better? Does that? So it outlines our 5 ambitions for children and young people with SEND. They're up there on the screen. Achieving the best outcomes to inclusion and participation, preparation for successful futures at the earliest opportunity, working together with children and their families, accessing the right support at the right place at the right time. You know, that will come from the SEND Green Paper, and supporting children and young people in their recovery from COVID. And that action plan that is presented to you today is off the back of that strategy and outlines our actions to help reach those ambitions. But also, in addition to that strategy, as you know, we have the SEND Safety Valve Action Plan, which is an action plan that has been agreed with the department. It's a 4-year plan which puts in place actions that help us to operate a sustainable system and a financially sustainable system, managing within the budget that we get within each year. And that action plan also has a number of priorities that are up there on the screen around supporting EHCPs so they are timely and appropriate and the right young people have EHCPs, increasing the proportion of children and young people who have their needs effectively met in our mainstream schools, and ensuring that we have value for money and we are an effective commissioner and we have cost-effective provision, and that we have the right provision and the right amount of provision for our children. And if I move on to this diagram in terms of our access to provision. So both of those strategies, and what underlies this, is about making sure that children with SEND can access the right provision at the right point in their education. And education health care plans are absolutely about access to education and making that an equitable playing field. So you have at the bottom of that triangle there what would be available more universally, and every child accessing the right support in their school through high quality teaching, quality first teaching, and appropriate differentiation and a broad curriculum offer that young people can access. You also have whole school approaches where schools will take on board whole school approaches that will positively benefit children with particular need types and not actually disadvantage the whole cohort of children, but will actually support the need types they've got. For example, the environment that the school uses might well assist children with autism, for example. The colours they paint their walls, the settings that the atmosphere and environment they make for children, the language that they use, and one of the things that Medway schools have agreed to is that adoption of trauma-informed approaches. In the green there, then, you've also got the additional provision that we would ordinarily expect to be available in mainstream schools. And mainstream schools have developed that provision, so there's an agreement about what that provision is. And mainstream schools do have a legal and statutory duty to make best endeavours to cater for the needs of children with special educational needs and disabilities, up to quite a high level. There's also, within that, you can see that says local locality resources, and that's where we're working to develop further provision, further training and outreach supports that feeds into schools. And then you move into resource provisions and special school provisions for those children with the most complex needs. Resource provisions being in our mainstream schools where a child can access some additional support in a provision, but also access mainstream schools, the mainstream classes, and then special schools for those most complex needs. And what the plans do is they strengthen and put more resource lower down in that triangle, because at the moment we have a number of young people who escalate to needing resource special schools and specialist provision, whereas actually their needs can be met in their mainstream schools and in their localities with their communities and their peers. So a lot of our work is about putting more resource, more support into our schools and into the local area to ensure that that breadth at the bottom of the triangle is much broader. It's worth noting that peach triangle at the top, special school and resource provision, is the only provision that a child needs an EHCP for. All of the rest of it, they can have an EHCP anywhere else, but they only need it to access the resource provision and the special provision. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of those activities in a bit more detail. We are very conscious, and I've certainly had a lot of feedback from schools and from parents around the provision in early years and that early identification of need. We have increased the training offer to early years providers around identification, but also about supporting transition into primary. We are working at the moment to change our systems, and one of the biggest changes that we will be making is about supporting families, helping them to navigate the system and actually getting earlier intervention. So we are at the moment going through a process where we will move to putting multi-skilled teams, inclusion teams, in our family hubs, so that families will have a point of contact where they can access to get any support around education, not just SEND, but attendance, electively home education, children missing education. Anything that they need support with to do with education will be in our family hubs alongside all of the other multi-agency teams that are there. We are hoping to pilot that from January with full rollout for following September, but we're going through our internal processes to make that happen. And we know, having done quite a lot of work with Medway parents and carers and to our families, that the earlier we can get in and support, the earlier we can help parents navigate a system or navigate it on their behalf, have those conversations with schools, the easier it is to support young people. And young people don't have to get to the point of failure in the system or the system failing the young people or exclusion before they come to our attention and we actually can intervene. So very much focused on that early intervention. We are increasing the support and the provision in our mainstream schools. You will be aware, some of you will be aware of the ordinarily available agreement around what is available for schools and the parent guide of that, which is out and on the local offer and available for parents to see. We have commissioned some training, a core offer of training. We have trauma-informed practice rolling out across our schools, but also more recently, we're commissioning some very bespoke training so that schools can be upskilled on particular need types. And with that, have some bespoke consultancy support and some outreach work where they might have a particular individual that they need some more help with, that they can access that support, and that will be provided within that locality and free to schools. We're also aware that the funding to schools for children and young people with SEND, which comes through their notional budget, particularly if a school has a high proportion of children with EHCPs, that money is stretched and doesn't go as far. This year already we have put out just under £500,000, so £490,000 to schools who have the highest prevalence of children with EHCPs to top up their notional SEND budget so that their notional SEND budget is preserved for dealing with those children who don't have EHCPs, because their funding, we're putting that in addition. And we have a programme of building resource provisions within our schools, so we have a number coming online over the next couple of years, some starting this September, over the next couple of years, and that includes resource provisions in our selective schools, because at the moment the number of children with SEND in our selective schools is well below where it should be. We are also in the process of reviewing our alternative provision. We have consulted with schools on that. It is a journey that we're on with them, but very much focused on outreach, early intervention, in line with the SEND and AP improvement plan. We have done a lot of work around that cost of provision. Certainly about a year ago, we put in a commissioning team into the Children's Services commissioning team. Children's Services have a commissioning team in terms of the safeguarding aspects and the appropriateness of provision. But what we've done with that is we've added an additional resource, which means that there's now a framework that focuses on the quality of education. So not just looking at the safeguarding, but actually are the outcomes that our young people getting in those provisions right? Is the quality of education right? All of our independent schools now have a contract with us. It's a slight variation on the national schools contract, but they now have a contract with appropriate mechanisms where we can hold schools to account if we're not getting, our independent schools, that is, to account if we're not getting the provision that we want for children. And we have introduced, or in the process of introducing, an EHCP banded system. That means that children with an EHCP will now have an amount of funding attached to that EHCP based on their needs, and that funding will follow the child to whichever school that child and parents choose to send that child to. It removes the need for lots of back and forth with unnecessary paperwork. It removes the delay in the time frame of schools having to evidence the cost of additional provision and then apply to us for funding and then not know whether they get it or not. So it actually takes away some of the perverse incentives for schools not to want to take children with the EHCPs, because it is so difficult at the moment for them to guarantee the additional funding that they will get. It also means that schools, knowing children coming in, they will know the amount of funding, and they can be more innovative and creative with the provision that they are designing to help that child integrate and access education along with their peers. We have conducted a post-16 review. We brought in an external consultant to do that. You have that paper for you this evening, and that is about making sure that our transition post-16 and post-19 is absolutely appropriate. And the post-16 review looks at the post-16 provision for all children, what we have on offer, where are our gaps in curriculum, does our curriculum align with our our workforce deployment, for example. Where are the jobs in Medway? Are children getting the right careers advice and guidance? And where do we need to work to grow provision so that our outcomes at Key Stage 5 for all children, but particularly our most vulnerable, are as good as their peers and as good as nationally. And that report that you have this evening, it presents 11 recommendations that the Council can consider. The intention for that, because it is a partnership arrangement, is that we will have a post-16 partnership group with all of our stakeholders, our providers, as well as the Council, to look at how we take those recommendations forward and which ones we want to prioritise. The final paper that you have for us for this evening is a self-evaluation. So Ofsted updated the SEND inspection, and that came live from January. And it looks at, what is it like to be a child in the local area. And it is a local area inspection, what we need to do to improve, and kind of the recommendations and priorities that we need to act on. And the report outlines the possible outcomes. It's not like you may expect of inspections where you get outstanding, good, requires improvement, adequate. There are 3 ratings. You are either good, you're not good, or you're inconsistent. So it's a red, amber, green rating. So we have done a fairly robust exercise in terms of a desktop exercise. Ofsted rely very heavily on the experiences of families and young people and what they tell us. And we have given you an honest appraisal of where we think we are at the moment. Obviously, there are a lot of changes taking place, but those changes haven't had significant time to embed. So the one you can see where we're amber and green around commissioning, that's been in place a bit longer, and we're starting to see the benefits of that. But other activity is not as far along as it needs to be to evidence impact at the moment. But it's fair to share that with you, to say that is where we are. We could get a call for a SEND inspection at any time. There's no real pattern to them at the moment. We were last inspected, a full inspection in 2019, but we were signed off from our areas of improvement from that inspection in 2021. So we could get someone this September. It could be any time coming up. So we are getting ourselves ready for that inspection. And that's the end of so we're opening for questions.
All right, so if I can just remind everyone when they speak to move the mics closer to them so that they can be heard. And if we go for kind of 3 questions in one, great, we can get through it quicker. Perfect. Councillor Lammas and then Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Celia, for your report, and also to Aretha for your very informative briefing, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, on this subject matter. I'll group, in accordance with your guidance, Chair, my questions into 3 themes, if I may. The first one is on whole school approaches to S&D provision across Medway. In my experience, since academisation has taken place, the best SENCOs have kind of moved to a sort of management strata level, and expertise on the ground has somewhat diminished, but it is a patchwork. There are some examples of excellence of SENCOs, and there are some examples of some trusts where they have not enough SENCO support on the ground. Notwithstanding academisation, the first question is, what is Medway Council doing to extract best practice from the good SENCOs across Medway to feed that into all of our schools, so that we can make sure that every child gets the best sort of provision no matter what the setup of their school is? Second question revolves around this banding that we've introduced. I recognise that we're on a special programme, I've forgotten the term now, safety valve system, and we've got to sort of come up with ways to do that. You mentioned in your report about EHCP banding provision. My understanding from the briefing was there's also banding provision for SENK children in terms of the level of evidence they need to demonstrate to local authority in order to get top-up funding if they aren't in a receipt of an EHCP. So could you please explain what's going on with that banding? Because my concerns would be is that if we've got about 8,000 special needs kids in Medway, how is it possible on a human resource level for the local authority to be accurately assessing those kids, all 8,000 of them, by banding to ensure that the schools are given the appropriate percentage of the full top-up funding that otherwise would in the past have received? And a follow-up question to that is that sort of change in approach in how we're doing things, is that going to put more pressure on schools to encourage parents that the only way to fulfil the education journey of the special needs children is to go down the EHCP route, because there is that attraction of a sort of quote-unquote guaranteed funding that comes with an EHCP, whereas if they're just on the SENK register, it's almost like they have to sort of decide, well, how special are they? Well, they haven't got a statement, they haven't got a plan. The local authority is going to judge how much money we can get from them. So I'm worried that the solution that you may be trying to implement to solve the problem of the percentage of kids in mainstream versus special schools versus a local authority, is they're going to create a culture that will actually make our long-term situation worse. So I'd like your assurances on that. And my third question, if I may, Chair, is it follows on from that about the percentage of SEND kids we have in special schools in Medway versus other local authorities. You mentioned in the presentation that you believe that this is somewhat a result of a selective education system that we have in Medway, whereas some other areas don't have that. If that is the case, is the council making specific bespoke representations to the Department of Education for a different funding settlement for SEND to reflect the fact that we have this selective education system, and because the correlation between deprivation and special needs will mean that there is going to be a greater proportion of kids in a comprehensive, smaller sort of bandwidth of schools versus other local authority areas? And if we aren't making that representation, can we, and what avenues are open in that space? I appreciate the very long questions, but obviously it's something I'm extremely interested in, and I don't want any of my criticisms to be taken as a reflection on the team, because I actually think you guys are doing an incredible job in very difficult circumstances. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I'll work back, I think, and then I'll pass over to Aretha around the support for SENCOs. But so the selective education system, if we look at the proportion of children with the HCPs in our mainstream schools, particularly for secondary, and we discount the selective schools, then the proportion is in line with national for our secondary schools, but we have a very low number in selective schools. So we are working to resolve that by putting resource provisions in our selective schools. Now, obviously, the selection or having a grammar school system is the decision of the council. Children with SEN going into our selective schools have to pass the Medway test. So by definition, we would actually expect more children to be in our non-selective schools. We haven't made any representation around the funding and increased funding because of that. I think you're referencing the conversation in the induction around choice, parents making a choice at the end of primary school where they feel that a large non-selective secondary school is not the right place for their young person, and therefore pushing us for a special school. The evidence is that we do have a much higher proportion of applications in Year 5 and Year 6 in preparation for secondary education, and we have a high number of cases that we are taken to tribunal on because parents are asking for special schools. We're looking to resolve that by making all of our schools an appropriate option. So if a child is academic but has SEN needs, they can access our selective schools. We are reviewing our Medway test criterion arrangements, and we've been in discussions with our selective school head teachers around that, about how we make that more accessible. So we haven't gone down the road and said, actually, give us something different. We've tried to address the access to the education system that we have for our select schools for these young people. The top-up fundings, is this all right? Is it loud enough for you? The top-up funding, so at the moment, if I talk about, so SENK is children who don't have any HCP but are identified as having an SEN need by the school. The funding that schools get to cater for those children is that notional budget, and that is calculated on a number of factors: number of children, prior attainment, deprivation, and it comes as a calculation in one lump sum to the school. At the moment, schools can apply to us for children without any HCP and say, actually, I need an additional bit of money to support this child. Their needs are costing me more than the additional $6,000, and they can make a case for it. They make that case and say, actually, we need this additional money for 6 months, and it is reviewed every 6 months. They have to reapply every 6 months, and the intention of that money is to allow schools to provide something intensive that's quite short term. If a child needs long-term provision that costs more than the £6,000 element 2, then the child should have an EHCP. And we're quite firm on that because an EHCP protects the child and the parent when they transition, if they move out of area, if they move schools, if they go somewhere else. It secures the fact for that child, these are the needs, this is the support they need. That is their right as a parent to have that EHCP. We currently give out less than 200,000 in non-EHCP top-ups, and for all of the children that are on those non-EHCP top-ups, none of them, other than the ones that have just recently gone on, have been on there for less than 6 months or have done 6 months and come off. The schools have to go through the process of reapplying to get the next 6 months and the next 6 months and the next 6 months. So what we have said to schools is that we will cease that, but what we are doing is topping up the SEN notional budget so that if those children have changed into being children with the HCPs, we pay the 6,000 so that their notional budget isn't depleted. And that review and change to the notional budget went through consultation with schools and was agreed by the schools forum. And actually, when we costed it, we based it on the October census, and we had one school that would have been over the national average in terms of children with the HCPs, and would have cost 30,000. Because that was the October census, we then did the figures again on the January census, and we'd gone up to 30 schools. So that shows how schools are engaging and growing the numbers that they've got. And we have used the January census because of that increase, and we've given out 490,000 to top up. So we are giving top-ups to schools to support notional budgets. We have given a lot more, but we are not doing it now on that individual child make the case. When we told schools we were changing back in sort of November and December, the schools forum meetings in January, we saw a spike in EHCP referrals from schools, rightly so. We expected that, and we have processed those. And where schools are still waiting for those to be processed, we're not cutting the funding until they have been processed. But we think that this way is a fairer system. It puts more money in, but recognises those schools that have the largest challenge, some being our non-selectives, where they have a higher proportion, and they are getting the additional funding in. I understand what you're saying, that there might be a perverse incentive to push EHCPs. We have a very robust EHCP application process. When we've got the family hubs in place as well, those conversations we can have with parents. Our parent request for EHCPs has actually dropped over a period of time, and a lot of our parent requests, which were not supported by health or education, we were turning down. So parents were saying, I need some help, going through a process and being told no, and then they've got nowhere to go. So the point of putting family hubs and having parents being able to come in and say, this is my issue, what's my best way through? Can you help me navigate the system to get what I need? Then that advice going in a lot earlier will help that demand. And we are the control in terms of our assessments and whether we issue an EHCP, we can quality assure that and monitor. So even if there is that perverse incentive where we get applications coming through that aren't appropriate, we are in control of the system that's determining whether they're appropriate or not, and we can actually make sure that only the right children are getting them. But actually, if another 10,000 children, and they don't need EHCPs, rightly, then they should have EHCPs. We shouldn't be setting ourselves a target to say, less EHCPs. It's the right children having an EHCP. I'm going to just go to Aretha for the Senko.
Thank you. So just looking at your first question in regards to the Senkos and showing that best practice across the board. So we have already commissioned an AP lots, and part of that AP consultation that Celia referenced earlier was really looking at that exact fact and how we can train staff to build that system leadership. And it really speaks to the bottom two tiers of Celia's pyramid, where we're looking at the high quality teaching, yeah, exactly, and the whole school approaches, because that's actually where you're going to get the biggest shift in terms of supporting students with SEND to access the curriculum and the environment within either a mainstream school or an SRP. So that will, if you target actually that as part of your curriculum, by default, it will benefit everybody else as well. So that's the kind of ethos that we've used. Within that AP commissioning package, we have two lots that are really relevant here. Lot one is really around the training and development, so that upskilling of staff across schools, not just the Senko, but actually we're talking about teaching staff, we're talking about actually creating a mechanism which can then disseminate some of that training through the schools. And schools are able to decide which ones best fit their demographic, best fits their needs in terms of their staff skills gaps or evidence base. So it allows schools to select from a menu, as it were, of different training, whether that be targeting ASD, targeting speech and language, targeting SEMH, or something else. And we're working with schools to make sure that when we create that schedule, the annual schedule, that we are getting the training right, because otherwise we're going to miss the point of it. We also within that have some elements of coaching. So that's again targeted coaching for Senkos as part of that training package. Lot two is around outreach, and that outreach program is really around a student or a group of students and people going in to support schools to develop systems that will meet the needs of that student or a group of students. So again, we're showing, actually we're not just talking about it, we're actually showing how we do it. And that's really important in terms of transferring practice from paper into actual physical, living, breathing practice for that child. Within that, we also have some conferences that we run every year. We're looking at how we strengthen those and how we build a layer just for Senkos, actually, so that they can have that regular review meeting with us so that we can then build that practice. We're also looking at a review of certain practice and policies already, and that's scheduled in for next year, where we're looking at actually things like the EHCP review process, the banded funding review process, so we're actually getting feedback from Senkos in terms of how it will work on the ground. And then I think you mentioned that Senkos are SLT or sometimes at that senior level, and that again speaks to those bottom tiers of that pyramid, that whole school approach. And the rationale behind it, I believe, was actually you have to have enough clout in the school to make that change. And often if Senkos aren't on that senior leadership team, they don't have a say in the curriculum. They were not able to push some of that forward. So that's why, although it might seem removed, it's actually not. They're still doing the work. They've just got a bit more clout within the schools to hopefully get some of that work and that inclusion agenda driven. And, you know, having personal experience and professional experience of being a Senko, I can just say, you know, I thank them for the work they do.
Thank you for those answers. So just so I'm clear of the understanding, so any child who's on the SENK register, they're going to get the £6,000 top up. That's not banded. It's only those with EHCP are going to be banded. Is that what you said with regards to the banding? So if it is the case that any child on the SSNDK register, the school has to apply for a proportion of the full top-up funding, i.e. basically they have to evidence somehow, and they have to decide with the local authority how much funding they need? Or is it the case that only if their provision can't be met within the 6K nominal amount, above that it's banded? Now, you said that, that you've made a decision to cease above SENK top-up, so £6,000 and plus funding decisions in the absence of an EHCP plan, but you kind of suggested that where you kind of know someone's on the way to EHCP, you've not put a pause on the funding for that provision for those kind of children because you kind of know they're going to get an EHCP. So if a child is on, say, a 2-year waiting list for an EHCP, and the school is saying to you that their need is above the amount that I can afford through the nominal 6K funding, can they still apply to the local authority, Medway Council, to get that provision in place in the absence of EHCP? Or if we now said without an EHCP, we can't get it? Which, of course, the thrust of this question is getting to the point of, are we sort of closing the door to funding provision for children that may need additional support when they're, of course, waiting on an endless wait for an EHCP that they might not get for ages because of the shortage in the professionals that do that kind of work? Those are the clarification questions I had. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So, the banded funding is only for children within AHCP. The maintaining funding is why we're going through this transition period. So children who are getting it now, we won't take it away until their EHCP is in place. But what we're saying is from September, the element 3 funding, the banded top-up funding, will be for children with EHCPs, and other funding, as is in the statutory duty of schools, will be down to schools to provide as part of their SEND notional budget. So schools need to provide that support and that interim support while an EHCP is being provided. That is their legal duty, and yes, we're saying they will have to do that. We do recognise the delay in EHCPs, and we are working to resolve the issues that we've got in the delay of issuing EHCPs. So our new structure will address some of our process issues. We will have a full complement of educational psychologists from September because we have 3 trainees that will come through and fill our vacancies, and we have more trainees in the pipeline. And at the moment, our ed psychologists are working only on statutory work to try and clear our backlog. We also have a team of agency caseworkers who are clearing our backlog of annual reviews. So I recognise the frustration in the system caused by the delay, and it's a national delay because of the shortages, but we are working to resolve those issues so that there isn't a longer delay, and we've got a feed-in time for that. I mean, we're estimating around next April to be caught up. So we're operating through a transition where we are making decisions in the best interest of the children, because if they've got funding, we'll carry it on. But where we're trying to get to is EHCPs are issued in a timely and effective manner. Schools fulfil their duties in terms of the prior to element 3 need. Local authorities fill the element 3 need, and we do that in a clear and transparent way with a banded funding system.
Okay, Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. I also want to echo what Councillor Lama said. You're doing a very important, significant job in frontline, crucial services, so thank you for that. However, this is a scrutiny committee, so some of what I wanted to raise has already been addressed, so it's okay if you don't want to repeat yourself. I'll say it anyway. So it's about the experience of parents and carers as they navigate the system when they're trying to get support and understanding. If I'm honest, I was a bit frustrated reading the plan, because I have a child who's 14 years old now, and I remember going through all of the steps of figuring, even beginning to wonder what behavioral issues, why is this happening, asking the school, finding what charities are out there for support, didn't know anything. And a lot of this stuff we were already telling you, so many years ago, things about communication gaps between different services and information not being cascaded within organizations, and the process just being really complex and hard to access. No joined up services or thinking in terms of how support is given, no one place where people can go to. And, we used to have Sure Start centers in those days, and, we would go there, they would give out little sheets of this is where you can go, this support. There was already training available then. There was already awareness growing. And here we are with the 2022 to 25 strategy, kind of with parents and carers telling you similar stuff to what was already there. So I guess my question is, how do we guard against us all sitting in this room in 2025, looking at a new strategy with similar issues, same kind of things coming up, you know? I just want some reassurance that this will somehow make an impact, that I don't want to ask why we didn't get this sorted before, because, you know, it's a very complex thing, I understand. It's not about laying blame. It's just about how can we make those improvements which are tangible and sustainable and permanent. A more specific question I have, my second question, is about the measurement. A lot of this, your improvements and your ambitions, the measurement is qualitative, and you're asking for respondents to a survey. And the cohort of respondents is very small. It's about 120 people. So when you are getting feedback of people saying, oh, this has worked, how representative is that because if you've got 7,200 SEND children on your books, you know, and 120 people responding. As a parent, when I was navigating this, I don't think I ever took any survey. I don't think I even knew that there was a survey or how to access it. And I speak to a lot of parents who are struggling with this, and they're not engaged at that level. They don't, you know, but I do hear similar issues. So you know what the issues are. It's absolutely on the money. It's just about how we can move forward. And finally, very quickly, third question is about the risk. The funding that you've said, 17.5 million, I think, which is quite significant and goes a long way in addressing your deficit. That funding presumably has some kind of timeline on it, some kind of goals that you have to meet before the funding, you know, is fully released. I didn't see any targets around that. Like, do your improvements and what your ambitions are here, do they align exactly with the funding requirements? Because I didn't see that raised as a risk either, because the funding, it says explicitly that it's dependent on success being demonstrated, that the funding will be released. So I was just curious why that wasn't picked up as a risk. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of how we assure moving forward, we are really linked quite tightly now with Medway parents and carers and getting that feedback. We have a much stronger permanent team within the department. We are listening to that feedback. We're following up, and actually I don't want to talk about what happened before, but obviously the last SEND inspection was inadequate. There was an accelerated progress plan, but that happened during the COVID pandemic. So actually, whilst things were done, what was actually possible to be embedded, particularly across schools, why that was going on. So maybe the progress coming out of that wasn't as quick as it could have been. But in terms of your feedback, Medway Parents and Carers provide us with some feedback on a survey. We have a huge database of parents, so Aretha will talk through about some of the evaluation and how we are now measuring ourselves and getting more broader feedback than the parents that respond to Medway Parents and Carers survey. In terms of the risk, there is absolutely a very robust risk register and action plan that is the safety valve action plan, and we will only get the funding released if we meet certain targets that are set in that action plan. And I can share that as a briefing paper. It wasn't in this because the SEND action plan is about quality and young people. The safety valve action plan is very much about meeting those targets and when the money is released, etc. It is a 4-year plan, but we are now in year 2 of that plan. We report to the DFE 3 times a year on some quite robust KPIs and on where our finances are looking. And only on that reporting do they release the next tranche of money into the local authority. Do you want to pick up on the quality?
Yeah, so just in terms of your measurements, and you saw me nodding there, I'm very much an evidence-based practitioner. So what you're saying is something right up my street in terms of making sure that we've got a really secure evidence base to start. So in terms of our needs analysis, and we've already got some of that already underway. some of it will be qualitative, but we've also got really hard evidence in terms of the outcomes, in terms of attendance, exclusions, all of that sort of stuff. So we've actually looked at evidence bases in the whole, rather than just focusing on the qualitative. And actually, where we've got the qualitative, we will be translating some of that into quantitative evidence, actually. So we're looking at the patterns, we're looking at the trends, and making sure that we're pulling out the wider themes from those surveys and then acting on that. And that will feed back into our action plans. And all of our action plans and all of our strategies embed, it kind of link into each other. It's not an isolated plan. So the safety valve, there are elements in the safety valve within the SEND action plan, because actually some of that work complements each other. And that's really important, that we're not operating in silos within our own service. We also have some IT that we're going to be looking at in terms of how we can ensure that when we're asking children and families to report back to us and give us feedback, actually we're making it accessible for them. There's a lot of paper-based stuff that we're trying to get rid of and making it a bit more slick and mobile-friendly in terms of making sure we can get that feedback. And the family hubs and the schools are our partners in doing that. Being in the local area is a much easier way of getting that feedback, because you're able to build the relationships directly with parents. They don't have to come into Gunwall. Some people find that quite intimidating, actually. When it's in a family centre, then actually you might get a lot more qualitative data and a lot more rich data in terms of experience. And then also we're looking at evaluative processes. So we're looking at a review cycle to make sure that it's not just a one-stop evaluation, it's a continuous cycle. So everything that we're doing and we're planning has that end kind of mindset of, okay, how are we going to evaluate it? What KPIs are we going to be looking for? Where are we going to get that data? Who are we going to ask and support across the local authority, but also with our stakeholders and partners? So that evidence base is very much embedded now within the mindset of our leaders in terms of making sure that whatever we're planning, whatever we're implementing, we're always looking at the end goal, actually what impact is it having on the service user, and how we're going to collect that in a really robust manner.
And I'd just like to confirm we have received the first tranche of the safety valve funding, which was 5.7 million, and we've had confirmation that they will release the first tranche of this year's funding, which is just over 700,000.
And Councillor Minishon?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Celia, for that presentation. So I had 3 questions. Are we providing additional TAs to mainstream schools, especially given that they have to give extra support to send pupils? And is this an extra strain on teachers, or do we already have that in the plan to have additional TAs? Also, you mentioned if less parents are requesting EHCP support or being turned down, is this due to lack of awareness of what signs they should be looking for a child who requires special education needs and disability? And my third question, so I know you've mentioned the programme has been provided to primary schools, and I think you said there was some plan to provide it also to early years. Is there a reason why the programme wasn't rolled out to early years first, to try and, detect, children with special needs early? And what is the plan to provide it to early years? I'm sorry, I do have a 4th question. What is the Triple P parenting support programme I think you mentioned, and how has the uptake been? How's that being measured? Because on this report it says parents and carers of children with ASD and ADHD are better informed and supported in meeting their child's needs. How's that been measured? How have you got to that conclusion? Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of additional TAs, we don't provide them. We provide the school with the funding. So where a child has a band of funding, if we deem that need requires one-to-one support, then they'll be on a much higher band, which will bring in enough funding. It's incumbent on the schools to make a decision about whether they need that and put that in place. I think, in terms of reduction of requests for parents for EHCPs, we are doing a lot more work to support parents. We work very closely with Medway parents and carers. We attend coffee mornings and have drop-in sessions, and I'm hoping that parents are beginning to feel that we are more accessible to them and ask us questions, and that's that I think is driving the reduction, because the reduction is from parents who are frustrated, they're not getting support from their school, they're not recognising. So we had quite a high number that had no real evidence behind them, but a parent was saying, actually, I'm stuck and I need help and nobody's helping me, so I'm going to go down the only route I'm being advised to by, you know, the national NDS, put an EHCP request in. We're actually able to support earlier, so we're getting less of those requests that aren't supported by educational or health professionals. So I think it's a positive sign. You know, we've gone from something like 46% to 25% of our referrals being from parents with no other stakeholder involvement. And then the kind of early years. So our early years programme, we've always had one. We strengthened it this year. So they were in the first lot. That was already run last year. We put more in last year. The programme that Aretha was talking about in terms of that training is for primary and secondary schools. It's across the board. And that is very much focused on making our secondary schools better able to cater for children with SEN. But our early years training, we have grown as well, and that is already in place, and we've grown that around early identification. And we have a early years SEN team that operates a bit like a portage mechanism, supporting early years providers with those young people. The parenting support programme, I don't know the full detail of it. That's a health provided programme, and unfortunately health aren't able to be with us this evening. So if you're happy with that, I will take that away as a question and ask for health to respond to you on that one.
Can I also, I'll send you an email separately, but add something onto the bit that goes to health, just to make sure questions around that.
Of course.
And then next is Councillor Peake.
I'm live, yeah. Actually, this is good timing. Thank you for your response, Celia. 10 years ago, I used to teach business in further education with children with SEND. The relationship between me as a teacher and the parents of children with SEND was very, very important. So that last question, I'm very interested in the answer to that as well. I would like to say I'm very impressed by the depth and the detail that Medway seem to be supporting children with SEND. I also found the information about the detailed funding between Councillor Lammas and officers very, very interesting. I hope you don't mind. I'm coming from a different angle. Maybe it's a bit off the agenda at this moment, but my concern is those schools which are not used to teaching children with SEND, could include selected schools or not. How, in your opinion, how well are they geared up to teach and support children with SEND? Because my experience as a teacher 10 years ago, teaching business, children with SEND, all in one class, about 20 children, average age 17, with a vast range of different challenges, but also different abilities. And there was a significant dispute between myself, my line manager, didn't do myself any favours, and other staff members about how we should teach these children, rather than be almost like, it doesn't matter, just get them through the course. That was one point of view, that was not mine. So it's the intellectual approach, but also the emotional support that these teachers, the department, if you like, and the heads of those teachers, their attitude toward supporting those children, and also the parents, because that is a major factor in this as well. If you give me some idea, please, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a broad range of schools with a broad range of experience in Medway. We have some absolutely outstanding, really inclusive providers, and we have some that are earlier on in the journey. And very much the commissioning work that we are doing, part of the conversations that we have with providers when we recruit them is about how you bring on board schools, not only those that are really keen to get involved, but how you work with those that have less experience and maybe some anxiety about engaging in this agenda. So we very much have those conversations with our providers, and there are a range of different ways, but Aretha touched on the kind of go in, with a child, a school's got a need around a particular child, and you start with that child and you help them work with that young person, and then that broadens out into a broader SEND approach in the schools. So I wouldn't like to quantify it, because actually with all schools it varies as well based on cohorts and children and staff. I can confidently say we work well with all the schools. We attend the CEO groups, the head teacher groups, the forums, and schools are very supportive and wanting to work with us on this agenda. And you know, it's a journey, and we'll take them forward on that. The support for parents I covered in terms of the family hubs, and part of us supporting parents and having a real focus on early intervention and support with parents is that by the time things have broken down with schools, between a parent and a school or a child and a school, it's usually at a point where you can't reverse that, and actually that intervention needs to be earlier. And we can have conversations with schools and with teachers that we can facilitate those for parents. We can support in both parties' understanding in terms of coming up with an arrangement that is in the best interest of the child.
Thank you for such an impressive answer.
And Councillor Jackson?
That moves me lovely onto my what I wanted to say. So I really am impressed with the bringing back or version of like the family hubs, but I work as an advocate for lots of people that are failing in our school system, and I appreciate what you're saying and getting it into early years, but there is a big pattern of children who are waiting for EHCPs in primary schools, but they're deemed to be coping. And this coping is then found out when they're in the, then when we're trying to find secondary schools for them, we're then trying to rush through the EHCP, and the mental health on the parents that are caring for these children with special needs are having the added mental health issues of trying to fight for their children. And it does have a massive impact. And, I sat on one of the discussion boards when EHCP took over from statements, and one of the things was that, it was going to be an all-round thing. And health is in there, and I appreciate they're not here today, but mental health and children now being diagnosed with and being referred to CAMS as a secondary condition that they never, ever had to suffer if they weren't just coping in that primary school setting. So I'm hoping that, in April we've got all that all under control. And as I said, the family hubs are brilliant. We just need to listen to the parents, though. I feel like parents feel even now they're not being listened to. And they do know that child best, so.
Thank you. I'm not entirely sure there's a question there, but I agree with what you say. Absolutely. And I think if we reflect then on the self-evaluation, that's not good reading. 4 areas red, 7 amber. That's not good reading. We know that that parents are feeling like that. We know these issues are there. And these are the action, this is the activity that we are working to resolve them, but fully recognise that the experience of a significant number of our parents is absolutely not where we want it to be at the moment.
Thank you. There wasn't a question, it was just a plea. Please do something about this.
And Councillor Goldwyn?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Celia, for a very thorough presentation. I think overall, our CND provision here in Medway, something we'd be proud of, and it's been interesting over the last few months, earlier in the year and into last year, talking to lots of residents on the doorsteps that overall, the majority of the parents' experience of this area is quite good. And it was interesting that I came across 2 or 3 families that actually moved into Medway because they'd heard that our SEND provision here is good. Whilst that is a splendid advert for our efforts, it does bring its own problems, and I think that is possibly one of the reasons why our funding that we've had for the high needs has not been sufficient over many, many years. And it does worry me that if we don't get this sorted out, it's going to put even more pressure on. Whilst it's good that we've got the figure of, is it there, 5.723 million, which was given in March to help us with this safety valve funding. I think to follow on from Councillor Campbell, I think, who started to probe in this area quite rightfully, what I'd like, because this is such an important issue, not only for the level of S&D provision that we can give in Medway, but also for the financial stability of the council as an organisation. We've got to get this right. So I think because it's such a critical area, if I could ask the Vice Chairman if we could perhaps have a report on how that safety valve is being spent, and what is in the programme. If you could give a brief outline tonight, Celia, would be good. But because it's such an important issue, it would be good, I think, for all members of the committee, in fact, all councillors perhaps, to have a detailed briefing note on this. And just as not as a question, but just a suggestion, Appendix A, Appendix 2, which had a huge amount of detail on it, was very difficult to read. Could in future it could be RAG rated or something? I found the tiny little figures suddenly trying to read. Yes, I see colleagues agreeing with me over there. So perhaps no, it's not criticism, just a suggestion. Just make it just slightly easier, particularly for us people whose eyesight is not perhaps as good as it could be. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your comments. And of course, yes, we can RAG rate as these come back. In terms of the safety valve funding, so just to clarify, the high needs budget, when we applied for the safety valve, had a £23 million deficit. We get about 50 million. We're on 54 million now a year in terms of that high needs block. Our safety valve plan gets us to operating within that 54 million in an in-year balance. The money then coming in goes to pay off our deficit. So by the 2026, we will not have a deficit. So the money coming in terms of that revenue, 5 million that we've got in, kind of goes straight into paying off the deficit. But there is a plan about how we're spending the 54 and where we're expecting the spending to reduce over time. And I can give you quite a high level point of that. Obviously, if you look at our triangle, the higher you go up the triangle, the more expensive an individual placement is, and why we have more children in our special schools than we have special school capacity. Then those children then go into independent placements, and that's where that cost escalates. It's not only the cost that escalates, but the quality of provision is less comparable to our good and outstanding special schools. All of our special schools are good and outstanding. If you go out into the independent sector, they're not. Some are not even meeting independent special school standards. We have enough capacity in our special school system with the growth that we're putting in place with our capital programme to cater for the children that we have in Medway and that need the specialist provision. But all children have to move down the system. We need more of the less complex children to be catered for in mainstream and in resource provisions so that our special schools can focus on our most complex needs. And then we don't need the range of independent provision that we're using, and that is where we are losing a lot of money. So essentially we pull children down the system, we bring in this, we control our spending a bit more, and also the commissioning work about having a contract in place and procurement also controls our spending a bit more, which is why we're doing an invest to save and investing in inclusion and support, because actually as they come down we'll be able to save that money further up the system. But absolutely I'll provide a detailed report on that, and that can be circulated.
And then Lenny Williams.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Celia. As echoing what other people have said, that everything's really comprehensive, so thank you very much. I just want to talk about one of the first points you raised this evening. You talked about the right support at the right time, and that you're seeking to develop further the outreach support that's available to schools. I just want to talk about what that looks like really from a funding perspective, because schools in my zone are seeing less of this support in terms of for next year. Certain outreach providers have said, well, they're now receiving funding for less pupils, so they won't be able to support us as much as they have done previously. So I just want to just ask really, how does that fit with the plans that you've got for developing outreach further when certain outreach providers have had their funding cut? Is it simply they lost a bid, or is it something that you've actually deliberately said, well, actually, no, we don't want those to be the main providers anymore? That's it, really.
No, I thank you. And we haven't published yet, so coming out in September will be the outcome of those commissionings. So we obviously had to go through our own internal governance process in terms of that procurement. But yes, some of those will be that those providers didn't win the commission. We have gone through one round. We will go through another round to bring in more providers, but it is about that. We've been really robust in our commissioning and had it really based on impact and outcomes, and we had a number of bids. We've had a number of successful bids. So actually what's out there and what we're spending is gone up, but the provider may well have changed.
Thanks, Celia.
Councillor Perfect.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to move this over here. There's a couple of points. Thanks for the comprehensive presentation as ever, Celia. Great work. On the couple of things, on the 20-week sort of SLA, I guess, guideline in terms of EHCPs, how far away are we from that as of sort of this week? And what is your view in terms of the long-term programme? Getting towards the end of the safety valve, hopefully we're going to sort of see ourselves at maybe 15 to 20 weeks as opposed to over that, I imagine. So it'd be good to have an update on that, because I think that's really business critical in terms of our overall, the service engagement that residents have in ensuring that we're delivering that, within timescales. The second one is just on the safety valve, and it's a question probably for Maria as well. Because of the sort of business critical nature of this, in terms of obviously the funding is vital to the financial situation that the council is in, and vital to ensure the continued delivery of the service. It'd be interesting to know what the ongoing engagement is like with the Department for Education in relation to that. Is it on a monthly basis we're meeting? At what level is that within the DfE? It would be interesting to know also from a financial perspective and I appreciate this is also a sort of question straying into the sort of Chief Operating Officer's capacity, but what is the sort of engagement the finance are having around that with you to ensure that we're covering off all bases on the safety valve? And then also just what the governance structure is, and apologies if you've already explained this previously, the governance structure around the safety valve, who is ensuring, 2026 is a crucial date, as Councillor Golvin referenced, in ensuring that we meet the needs and get the service in the place it needs to be in by 2026, because obviously there is a major critical risk failure on the council if we don't reach that. What's the governance structure around that, and how are we ensuring that sufficient progress is being made on a monthly basis towards that intended outcome, please? Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the statutory duty to issue EHCPs within a 20-week timetable, time frame, we are operating at about 17% being issued within 20 weeks. It's about 26% across the South East. Some of our nearer neighbours are slightly less, but nationally it was 65%, it's dropped to 45%. So we are significantly under on that. We are averaging at 24 weeks for an issuing of an EHCP. As I say, we're expecting backlogs and things to be hopefully resolved by April, and absolutely we're looking for a 15 to 20 week time frame. We have monthly catch-ups with our DFE advisor in terms of that, in terms of our statutory duties and our performance. That's not safety valve necessarily related, but monthly catch-ups with that. In terms of the safety valve, we report to the DFE triannually, and we have an annual conversation, but we have to submit a report 3 times a year saying where we are and what we're doing, and identifying any risks that come up. And actually on the submission of our report is whether we get the next tranche of funding. And then in terms of our own governance, so we obviously have the Schools Forum because this is dedicated schools grant money, so updates go to the Schools Forum. We have an inclusive education oversight group, which is representation from all of our school bodies, our CEO groups, etc. And then we have internal governance in terms of the Children and Adults Directorate oversight, which our portfolio holders sit on to have update from that. And then I'm trying to think of the other ones. A number of ones. But yes, in terms of the Children and Adults Directorate. So there's an awful lot of monitoring on the safety valve work that goes on internally.
And in terms of lobbying the government for funding, I can absolutely guarantee you that goes all the way up to our chief executive, our chief finance officer, and not just at Medway, it's across every local authority that we're all saying predominantly much the very same thing. And we're all saying we need more funding into the SEND. I mean, I can tell you personally, I was at a meeting where there was DFE colleagues and representatives, and they were meeting government ministers the very next day, and the number one item on the agenda was SEND finance.
I think that's really reassuring. Just one other thing just to come back on there. So in terms of, obviously, we're operating at that level in terms of, you know, nationally it's 45%, we're way under that. What is the impact in terms of complaints? I know particularly I've received in my inbox, and I know colleagues have, on all sides, I think, you know, complaints from residents and various other concerns and people, you know, local government, ombudsman, etc. What's the sort of impact of all of that? Not just reputationally, which is obviously very important for Medway as a local authority, but also looking at that as a more broad piece in terms of the actual financial implications on things being awarded against the council, on compensation or anything like that?
Thank you. So in terms of it translating into complaints and things that land in your inbox, yes, it does sometimes, but that's not really representative of the entirety of the cohort. And there are some parents who will have had lots of experiences that have led up to that complaint, and sometimes those experiences sit outside of the council and outside of the EHCP process, because if you think about it, that might be the end point rather than the start of their journey, and that frustration just builds over time. What we have done with things like the banded funding, with things like the AP consultation, is really look at how we're spending our time and how we can take away some of the other things, the paperwork that doesn't actually add to us meeting those deadlines. There is one bit that we haven't got control over, and this is a national thing, that's the EPs. But what we've done with the EPs is rejig their work and rejig their focus. So actually they are looking at clearing some of that backlog and statutory assessments. We have different panels going ahead from September. We are working with our Senkos in schools to make sure that the paperwork is streamlined for them also and the process works for them. We will be working with parents, importantly, to make sure that actually their voice is heard when we're looking at those processes. So actually as an endpoint user, you get a better deal and a better experience because we are taking on board those concerns and feeding that into actually our strategic action planning going forward. So hopefully we will address some of those issues. And as you said, you know, we are looking at catching that up, and actually, although it was 17%, I think you said, we're anticipating it's going to be much higher in terms of going to, for our next data drop. That will be the July and then the August, because we've got multiple panels going on, and we have also recruited additional staff to help with that backlog.
That's really good. Thank you.
can tell you we spend about £100,000 per year on tribunal costs and tribunal complaints and compensations, which when you consider we spend £56 million on our high needs block, it's a fairly small proportion.
Oh, and just to add into that, we respond to 100% of our complaints within the time frame and find resolutions.
And Councillor Jones, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to ask about the post-16, particularly in terms of inclusion. I mean, my experience of post-16 may be a little dated, certainly is my own personal case some time ago. You know, it's a very disparate picture. If you go to some local authorities, they've had a history of one sixth form college that delivers everything, delivers the vocational, the academic, and due to the selective system down here, etc., 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 you have a number of different sixth forms and a number of different post-16 providers. So could the officers give me some sort of snapshot as to where we are? There's a lot of good stuff in the report about single information sources and providing for vulnerable young people, but where we are in ensuring that vulnerable young people in particular get signposted to the right provision and that they're not in the NEAT statistics, and what is the level of support across the council? Are we joined up in terms of our care support provision, our youth services and the career service? Within that, is everything joined up to give those young people the maximum possible support through the system?
Thank you. So yes, the report shows, as you've described, a disparate picture. We have a good range of provision, particularly at level 3, so A levels and onwards. We obviously have one college provider that takes a lot of that vocational offer. We are lacking in offer that is below level 3, so that kind of level 2 vocational training offer. That's something that has come out, and actually that affects more of our vulnerable young people than those that are going through into A levels. So there is a bit of work to be done across that. In terms of the connectivity, so we do have a careers information advice and guidance team. We have a youth service. They absolutely do work together and support our most vulnerable and support them in finding the right pathways. Our NEAT figures are very good. Apologies, I haven't got them off the top of my head, but they are much better than they were even last year, our NEETs and not knowns combined, and that you'll see that in the dashboard, I think, in the next meeting. And that is to do with that team, that youth work and IAG team working directly with those individual young people and supporting them. We need to work to consolidate the offer and make sure that we have the right breadth of offer. As a council, we're not the ones with the levers to do that particularly, so we are facilitating that partnership working. We do have some strong partnership working. We have a Medway Education Partnership Group. We have very strong relationships and good relationships with our providers, and they have good relationships with each other and with our employers. So everything is there to push a partnership plan, a post-16 partnership plan forward, which will start to respond to the recommendations that are made in that report.
And Councillor Turpin, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a couple of questions on the post-16 review as well, and then one on EHCPs. So just reading in there, it talks about the post-16 providers having a bursary to support transport. But I just wondered whether, and I was looking in sort of the recommendations that you were sort of wanting to lobby government for this, and because I'm assuming that this doesn't come through the local authority, that that bursary? No. So I'm just wondering how you sort of know about who's accessing it. And I think you've got in recommendations there that you need to sort of make sure that more families are aware of it. So that was just sort of one. Another one on, it sort of mentions about sort of when the young person's having made their choice, the young people should then be supported to follow it through. And I'm just sort of slightly concerned with that, because actually it might be that, you know, they've chosen A-levels and that's not actually, they realise quite quickly that's not for them. So I'm just wondering sort of what flexibility there is sort of for the young person to make changes, and sort of the support there is around that. And then finally, just going back to sort of EHCPs, I'm not quite sure where in the process it happens, if it's when the EHCP is being sort of put together or whether it's when it's already been agreed. I hear about sort of children where, especially with complex needs, that there seems to be this argument between education and health on who pays for what. So I don't know if that would be during the process or whether that ever comes afterwards. And it holds up placements and things, because if the child needs a one-to-one, you know, who's paying for it? And I'm just wondering who oversees that and how quickly that then can be resolved.
Thank you. So in terms of the post-16 report, we commissioned ACL, an external consultant, to interview all of our providers, and this is the feedback they've come back with. Yes, you're right, we don't receive those bursaries. That's something that the post-16 providers can apply for. And so the recommendations that come from here are the recommendations that that company has made. And obviously they've made reference to supporting children maintain in their provisions. So they will have had that evidence base to suggest that perhaps they make a decision, then they don't make, they make a decision in May, and by the time September, October comes, they're not doing it. The full report is about 150 pages with all the evidence, etc. But the job of the partnership board will be to then go through this and say, right, which recommendations are right for us as Medway and what do we strengthen? So I don't have the full detail of an individual bit that's in there. I'm happy to share the full report. We just appraised it for you because it's a lot of reading otherwise. In terms of the HCPs, so the funding shouldn't hold up the decision. We do, as part of the process, make a decision about which bits are funded by health and which bits are funded by education and which bits are funded by social care. It is a joint plan. But it shouldn't hold up the provision. I don't know if Aretha wants to come in on...
Yeah, I was just literally going to say exactly the same. It shouldn't hold up the provision. We're able to name type. It might be that we are able to name placement, and it's the consultations that actually might cause the delay, particularly when there are complex needs. Actually, we've got to be really careful and really mindful about where we place those children. And that sometimes, because it's got that 15-day wait time, can then lead to delay. But we are able to name the type of placement in an EHCP, even if we don't have the exact provision. The funding element of it, actually, a lot of it is funded by education as it stands. When you speak about one-to-one support and that TA funding, that's part of the assessment process, and that will be borne out of that EP recommendation and recommendations from health and social care colleagues in terms of what that provision might need to look like in a school. Where it's really complex and there may be post-19, post-16 or residential elements, those are the bits that may take to a panel where actually we've got health, social care and education representatives discussing a case and looking at actually how we best fund that, but it doesn't hold up the process. That's something that happens anyway. If we find the right place, that's the place. The process behind it is something that we sort out. It's not something that will hold up that process in its entirety.
I mean, maybe that's something I can sort of take with you offline, because I have heard where sort of the placement has been decided, they know where the child's going, but they can't start because there seems to be this argument between the two of who's actually going to fund it. So
yeah, I'm happy to have that discussion with you, because there's different levels of funding and different processes, so I just need to unpick that.
Thank you.
And Councillor Venning?
Thank you, Chair. Mine is with the post-16. It's like we're looking at level 3 and A levels, but I believe some of our students who need special needs go into apprenticeship. And now I've not heard anything about apprenticeship. So with people who wants to go into apprenticeship from wherever they are coming from, what have the council got in place for them? Because I lecture in an institution that deals with apprenticeship, and it seems like what relationship has the council got with industries who are persisting, they would like to go into apprenticeship. If the council is not supporting them, how do those peoples get into apprenticeship? Because currently it's like apprenticeship is taking much, it's now becoming more prominent than even university education. So how does the council encourage our pupils who are post-16 and they want to go into apprenticeship and they have special needs?
Thank you. So the council has an apprenticeship team. They operate under skills and employability under Dan Ratcliffe, and those links with employers are there. There's not as many apprenticeships as we'd like, and obviously the ones that are there are out on and kind of the National Apprenticeship website and the offer that's there. In terms of the advice for children, so the IAG team that give advice, they will also give advice around apprenticeships and how to look at the opportunities that are there, in the same way as they'll give advice about all of the other opportunities that are there. And that's for all of our children, especially, including those with SEND. Does that answer your question?
My question is, how is the council supporting them, and how are the council working with institutions that provide apprenticeship for people with special need? Because if people are going to institutions that through apprenticeship and they need special needs, how does the council support those students to achieve or to work with other companies, because apprenticeship is from the company. So how does the company support institutions that encourage people to go in for apprenticeship? How does you support people with special needs, not individuals who want to go into apprenticeship, but if there are people with special needs, how does the council work with the companies to support people into apprenticeship?
So I think Aretha might come in terms of supported employment and things. So we do have an offer, and we're talking about disability confident employers. I don't have the full information on that, but we do have it in the council. So we probably need to come back to you on that one, because we do have supported employment for children with SEND, disability confident employers, and there is a lot of work that goes on with employers. But I wouldn't be able to give you the detail on that without having gone back to the team and asked them.
And just to answer some more of a question in terms of supported internships, so there are work programmes already in place, particularly within our special school providers and our post-16 providers, that allow students to actually have that mixed economy of learning practical skills, but also working with an employer to do so. So there are those opportunities there, and we do have partnership groups which involve our providers, and we are meeting and talking about what that supported internship looks like now and what we need it to look like in the future based on the outcomes of the post-16 review. So there is that work going on, and it is joint work with us as a local authority, but also the people that are delivering some of that work. And then within our mainstream schools, for those students with SEND, schools are really good at looking at the career options for those students. And because they know the students best, actually, in partnership with their parents, they're able to negotiate and kind of guide students down the right pathway in terms of what it might look like for them, whether they go down the A-level route, they go down an apprenticeship route, whether they're off to university or they want to enter the world of work. And that's part of the school's careers offer, which is underpinned by some Gatsby benchmarks usually.
Councillor Tev?
Thank you. Yeah, just coming in on that point, I think because I'm a member of Fortis Trust and they've got the Forward to Employment, so I think that's, I'll share the website.
Sorry, Councillor Goldwyn, I was busy.
Yes, that's right. Yes, so on the post-16, one thing that I didn't see mentioned in the report was the University Technical College. I thought that would have been a vehicle to help people into non-academic careers. There's quite a lot of talk about what Mid-Kent does, and they do some really, really good work, because I think this is a weakness with us nationally. Now, when I left school 50-odd years ago, I went straight into a technical apprenticeship, which gave me a middle-class income and standard of living for the rest of my life. So I went from living in a council house on Weedswood. That technical apprenticeship gave me an income level and skills that took me out of being a lad from Chatham, working from a council estate. Unfortunately, those avenues are no longer open to a lot of people. And I think that's a real weakness in this country, and it's something we've got to address. And there's a lot of young people with SEND that would make ideal tradespeople. They've got the ability to be skilled craftsmen, and we're missing out there. Unfortunately, as a country, we've relied on Eastern European and other countries to provide that. And I think it's a real weakness, and it's something we've got to address. And certainly my last 2 or 3 years in the shipping industry, visiting shipyards in the UK, when there were virtually no welders or platers that were from the UK. They were shipping them in whole teams from Poland, and then because we hadn't trained these people, it's not a new thing. I'm going back 15 years or more for that, but I think this is a weakness, and perhaps in areas because we do get apprenticeship levy money as a council. Perhaps something we could work with some of the local employers on this, because there's some, really, even today, there's some really good skilled jobs out there if people could only have that necessary training. And it's something that really annoys me that we've missed out that the opportunities that I had as a young person at 16 are just not there anymore. And I think we've had too much emphasis on university education. My shock was because I wasn't particularly academic. I left school at 16 into a technical apprenticeship, and then spent the next 2 years doing virtually nothing else but academic subjects for this. So people from if you can get, what I'm trying to say is, if you can get people to realise that practical skills are very much based on technical and academic skills as well, because if you can't understand the mathematics and the chemistry and the physics behind things, you're not going to be able to do things with your hands. And I learned to do a simultaneous quadratic equation for the first time, something I could never pick up at school. But when it was on a technical subject of dealing with the stresses in a framework, the penny suddenly dropped. It wasn't an academic subject. It was something that was a practical tool. And so we get this over. Even people who initially can't grab academic subjects, when you can take it from a practical point of view, the mathematics and the chemistry and the physics that go behind it suddenly all fall into place. Sorry to rant on, but it's something I feel very, very...
Was the crux of the question just what are we planning for technically? Did you catch?
I can come back. So the UTC were involved in the paper, and they will be invited to partake in the partnership board, so we can progress that. Your comments are very valid, and I think we spend all our apprenticeship levy already. So maybe a paper on apprenticeships at a later date for this committee would be helpful. Yeah.
Councillor Perfect.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of other points. Sorry, as I've gone through, I've realised that there's more points. Just on the 20 to 22 to 25 ambition, the sort of closer look. I know we're talking heavily in here about the number of children and young people with EHCPs who attend mainstream schools increasing, and I know we've had conversations about that. It was referenced within the induction sessions that we were referring to earlier. I just wanted to know, and I think it'd be helpful for the committee just to understand the engagement that's gone on with multi-academy trust CEOs on that, because I think obviously at the moment it's not hitting the maintain side of the of our education school system within Medway, focused on the academies side. What engagement there's been with CEOs, what the feedback has been, because I know certainly from the induction, listening to some colleagues on both sides of the room, but also some of the engagement I've had and conversations I've had with multi-academy trust CEOs, I know there's a bit of concern around that. So it'd be helpful, I think, for the committee just to sort of understand a little bit around what we're doing to support that transfer over and how the feeling has been and the supplementary engagement that's gone on since the consultation, because I know there was extensive consultation from your team on that. And then just a further point, just in relation to the action plan that sort of lays out the executive summary that you referred to within the report. We've obviously got, there's a number of concerns that are obviously raised, particularly around, we've got a lot of red, red and amber, which I know we've already spoken about some of the reasons why that is. I mean, the thing that certainly I picked out, which concerns me a little bit, is a bit around leaders evaluating services and making improvements. And then we talk later within the report about that being, we believe, mainly around middle leaders. So it'd be helpful to just understand a little bit around what we're doing to support that and provide training, CPD opportunities, and what the concerns we have in terms of the middle leadership within the service. Because I do think, certainly, reflected that, with Aretha's appointment and with your appointment, Celia, in recent years, and with Leanne, we've got a very strong sort of executive leadership team. But I guess it's obviously, and the concerns within here are around the middle leadership, so that would be helpful. And then I just guess more generally, in terms of some of the points raised within here, within the larger sort of table that Councillor Galvin referenced, that's quite lengthy, and there's lots of assessments being made on various parts of the action plan. What in terms of sort of the review that you undertake on that, I mean, how is that sort of overseen? Is that reported internally on a sort of reviewed on a monthly basis? How's the sort of internal processes sort of overseeing that? Is that just a yearly review, or what do we think? Because I think it just, there needs to be some close oversight, particularly around some of the stuff in here that's, when you look into it, that's got lots of concerns and quite detailed in terms of the improvement plan, just in terms of how we're ensuring that all of that sort of links together, I guess, because to me, it looks like there's a lot in here and there's a lot going on, but I'm just conscious from a strategic level, it can become a little bit confused at points. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So in terms of the MAT CEO involvement, we obviously regularly attend their month, their group of CEOs to talk through the developments and the changes that we're doing. We do have individual conversations with them as well to follow up on bits, particularly if there is a concern that they've raised, so we will go back and pick that up. We have CEO representation on our group, so if I link that into the governance of this plan and the monitoring and review, we have a core group, which is an internal core group, which is kind of our stakeholders and health partners and partnership commissioning. We have an operational group which looks very much at the detail in terms of the running it, and that all feeds into the SEND Partnership Board, which has all of those stakeholders on, much wider, including schools and your CEOs. So the review process, the operational review of this is monthly, and there are lead people for each of the ambitions. So they hold the team that are running that ambition, and then they report back in, and that feeds through the governance process into the SEND Partnership Board. In terms of the CEO's view of the changes that we make, I think they're like the schools, and their secondaries and primaries, they are varied. Some are very on board and supportive, some are a little bit apprehensive about the rate of change or as was mentioned previously, the perceived loss of some service because we're in that transition and not knowing what is coming to replace it or to put that in place. And we are in the middle of that because obviously there were certain things we couldn't say until our own internal processes had happened. In relation to the red and ambers, I'll let Aretha talk to it, but when we talk about leadership, as with any inspection, leadership cannot be more than the outcome of some of the other aspects. So, you know, with schools, for example, if the curriculum is, or the quality of education is only good, leadership can't be better, because leadership is about managing the system. So Ruth will talk about the distinction between that, but even our leadership as an executive leadership, if our system isn't good, we can say we've got lots in place, but we can't then say actually it's outstanding. Those are kind of limiting judgments around that. Sorry, Aretha, do you want to add?
Thank you. Yeah, and just in terms of the comments around the middle leadership and the capacity building there, I think certainly within education, teams are kind of new way of working will strengthen that in terms of developing that system leadership at all levels. There are some issues around actually gathering the data, and I spoke earlier about actually having the evidence mindset from inception all the way through, so that you're constantly gathering that data and able to evidence the impact of that data or adapt your plans based on the data. And I think that's something that we definitely need to make sure that happens at all levels, but also across the board with our partners, making sure that actually we've identified what data we're going to capture and then use that and be really robust in analysing that data and building that strong evidence base going forward. And I think when I've put that in there, that is what I'm kind of referring to, the inconsistency in that process and that and that way of working, which should, given that we've put some new processes in place and we're looking at the training and capacity, should improve over time. It won't be a quick improvement because it's a culture change, and it means that actually people might need upskilling, but it will improve over time, and that's what we're committed to doing.
Thank you. I think it's very reassuring to hear, particularly the self-reflection that you're making, Aretha, in terms of the changes that need to go on and the changes ongoing within the teams. I think that's very good, so thank you.
And Councillor Lamas?
Thank you, Chair. I just have two additional questions, if I may. The first one is regarding this transition. So, am I right in saying that you said, Celia, that you expect with the 3 trainees that come online in September, I believe you said, they would work hard and you expect to clear the EHCP backlog by April next year? But funding beyond nominal funding for SENDK kids will be stopped for any child who applies for it in Medway that doesn't have an EHCP in September this year. So is it the case that we're closing the door to kids before the kind of increase in the system capacity to do HCPs is up and running? I.e., if we're stopping applications for any kind of top-up funding that would ordinarily require an HCP, but we've in the past previously allowed that at September, but you're saying the backlog for cases that are already sitting there waiting to be assessed won't be cleared until April next year. What's going to happen to kids that fall in that gap, or have I misunderstood? And second question is regarding this safety valve KPIs. Clearly, a lot of the change in approach in Medway has been driven by these KPIs. Can you? I know you've already committed to a briefing note, but can you give us a flavour of what these KPIs are? Is this the case that that government is forcing Medway's hand in terms of changing the way we're administering the distribution of SEND funding? Is it, in your opinion, too harsh? Is it too fast? If you had a magic wand, would you do things differently? Thank you.
Thank you. So just to clarify on the gaps, so we're not ceasing funding for children who don't have EHCPs but currently get it. But from September, schools won't be able to apply. And the reason why it takes at the moment a long time for schools to gather the paperwork and evidence and for it to go through the process. So although we're working to clear the backlog and we're hoping to have that done by April, actually we're not, that gap, it's new ones that are coming in. We're saying, well, if you start then, it'll probably be nearly April before we're confirming funding coming in. Actually, what schools need to be doing is putting an EHCP application in if that child needs provision. And schools have been doing that. They've known about this since January and they have been doing that. The vacancy, so we've got 3 vacancies in our head psych team at the moment, and those trainees will fill those vacancies. But there is additional work. We're using a bank of independent EPs to just try and clear some of that backlog. So where a school has a concern about a gap, we're having those conversations. but we know the children that are in the system that are currently receiving something and are waiting for an EHCP, and we will continue to pay that until their EHCP is finalised. We're not taking new applications in September because actually they shouldn't be applying for that. They should be applying for an EHCP. And they should have done that already. So that's where that gap is. In terms of our KPIs for the safety valve, we went through quite a rigorous process in terms of, so we wrote the plan, we presented the KPIs, and then it was a negotiation with the department. Our KPIs are largely around meeting our financial targets that we've set ourselves, and a lot of those are to do with bringing the average cost of independent placements down or reducing the growth from 17% to 10% and that kind of thing. So there are financial KPIs. The other parts are forecasts, where we forecast numbers of EHCPs and forecasts around the proportion of children in each need type. So there was a slide in terms of how we sit with national, proportion in mainstream schools, proportion in special schools, etc. We've got targets around how many are then in mainstream, how many are in special over those 4 years. We set those. I don't think they're too hard. They are challenging, but I don't think they're too hard because I believe that that is the right thing for children. Children have a right to be catered for in their local community, in their mainstream school. It's what we should be doing, and we based our safety valve plan on getting it right for children. And actually in doing that, we make the numbers, you know, the numbers work as well in terms of the financial plan. But I can honestly say, and I think, you know, in terms of the staff that were here, that the officers that were here that went through that process, it wasn't the DFE saying, you've got to reduce your numbers of EHCPs, you've got to get this like this. We devised the plan, we talked to them about it. And we are making a financially viable system, but we're not doing something that we're not, or that we don't think is right for the children.
Councillor Gurung.
Thank you, Celia and Aretha, for your comprehensive report, as well as some of the responses which have actually answered some of my questions. And I would also like to thank Celia for responding to some of my questions via emails in a very timely manner, which I've appreciated, and I've shared it with my ward residents as well. I have 3 questions. Medway has signed up to providing right support at the right time. Obviously, support plans are dependent on assessments being completed and evidence being collated of the child's level of special educational needs. From your auditing and review, or the quality assurance processes, what percentage of decisions or EHCP reviews are delayed, not necessarily because of shortage of staff, but due to evidence not being collated properly or robustly presented for panel? And how can you reassure parents who are experiencing delays because of this that you will proactively try to plug this gap? My second question is, as you have highlighted, some schools have more children with special educational needs than others, which is understandable. How do you ensure the same timeliness with regards to progression to assessment or decision-making for the panels? How do you ensure that the panels are consistent? And how long is way too long a wait for our children and young people? Is there a system where the panel decisions are fed back to the council automatically for forecasting and planning purposes? My final question, is where a young person has responded better to off-site intervention, and as we know, complex needs appropriate levels of intervention. Sometimes the environmental factors also play a significant part in exacerbating or reassuring a young person. So if the integration off-site has been quite well received by the young person, can there be a proactive process to review
if the child can remain there, or does the reintegration plan have to be implemented regardless? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Do you want to do the policy one?
Do you want to do the first one? Or?
You go.
Okay, thank you for your questions. In terms of right support, right time, so you spoke about the evidence not being collated, and that might be a reason for delays. So there are different layers of evidence that we gather during an EHCP process, and some of that evidence comes from schools, some of it might come from the health service, some of it might come from social care. Sometimes schools aren't able to evidence a child needs an EHCP, and when it goes to that first initial panel, that is sat on by, it's a multidisciplinary panel. So when we review the paperwork, we may have some questions that need to go back to schools in terms of actually, can you evidence this, or actually you haven't evidenced the need to be great enough and that can't be met with your notional budget. So therefore they would be a no to assess, and they might go back for review. And after that, we actually have a mechanism called a way forward meeting, where we're able to sit with parents and schools and discuss that in more detail in terms of why we've come to that decision. So schools and parents are able to request that. In terms of the percentage that comes back, I'd need to do some further analysis of that and come back to you with the accurate percentage. And we would need to look at how we capture the data potentially to ensure that we've got that going forward. In terms of do you want me to keep going? In terms of the progression to assessment and making sure that that's equitable across the system, again, the first stage of that has to be those two bottom tiers of the pyramid. What are schools doing internally to make sure that they can meet those needs? Some of those needs might be met with a curriculum change or a teaching change, and that's actually a low-cost intervention. It's a tweak that needs to be made in the classroom. Sometimes it might need an additional adult, sometimes it might need some therapeutic work, and some of that evidence has to then be gathered. Actually, has that made an impact and improved the situation, or does the child need more? And when the child needs more, that's when the assessment comes. And some of those schools have higher demographics because of, for example, if you've got a resource provision, then you will have a higher percentage because you've got a resource provision dedicated for students with SEND and EHCP, so it will skew your data a little bit. And sometimes you have that data skewed by the demographic that you serve, so your community, and they might have a different demographic compared to the neighbouring one. We are looking at that decision-making process and making sure that's robust. So we do have that multidisciplinary panel, and on it sits health, social care, education. We have schools representatives there as well, because they are the frontline service that kind of meets with those parents and teaches those children, and their voice is really important in that process. So it's not the local authority making a decision in isolation. We are reviewing the paperwork, and on the panels we have rotations of head teachers, Senkos, who will contribute to that decision-making process. So we're able to assure that actually we are looking consistently, and we are looking actually from different perspectives in terms of what the child might need. The forecasting, we're able to pull that data. So in terms of the assessments and the decisions we make, we record that. So we're able to pull that data, and we then use that data to make changes within the service. So for example, we know that we're behind. So actually what we've done is put extra panels in place to make sure that we catch up. In terms of off-site provision, there's a lot of work going on in terms of alternative provision and alternative education. Some of that sits within the AP consultation. A lot of it actually sits outside of it. We do have a really robust way of recording who's that alternative provision, what they're doing when they're there, what are their outcomes, what's their attendance, have they been suspended again, have we gone down the EHCP route. So that time frame of half a term, so 12 weeks, actually what we're looking at is the progress over time, and it's a review meeting. It's not the end point. It might be that that child remains at alternative provision because that's the best thing for them at that particular time, but what we're not keen on is having a deterministic approach which says you're at alternative provision and there you shall stay until the end of your school life. That's not allowing for progression and allowing for reintegration. So where those children are being reintegrated into schools, we do work with the alternative provision and make sure the schools link directly to make sure that actually that transition back into a mainstream school works, because actually if it's done in isolation, then they're not going to transfer some of the good work that the alternative provision might have done to unpick some of that child's needs. Where an EHCP is required, we're working again with schools to make sure that that goes through at the earliest point, not the child being an alternative provision for 6 to 8 months before that's initiated. If we think that's what needs to happen, that should be initiated from day one, and the partners should be working together to make sure that they've got the robust evidence base so it doesn't get bounced back.
Thank you. And Councillor Peake.
I agree with Councillor Galvin and his lament about the demise of apprenticeships. So I do have a question. When the national when the providers of education was made national, in effect it was nationalised under the Conservative Prime Minister John Major, and then Tony Blair came into power, something happened here. There was the demise of polytechnics that offered apprenticeships, and everything became university, and therefore the massive emphasis on academia happened. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. So I agree with Councillor Galvin's lament about the lack of apprenticeships, also about his comment about basically there's a lack of British skilled workforce. There will be a significant number of children identified with SEND who could have the capacity to have a good career, whilst not necessarily being very academic. Apprenticeships used to be based on learning skills and learning the aptitude to be able to carry out those skills. So I'm very keen. This is an area that I'm quite passionate about, actually. So my question to you, actually, after all that, is it's only going to be a guess, of course, what capacity do you think there might be in Medway amongst the business community to provide more apprenticeships, please?
I don't think I'd even like to take a guess at that. We will talk to the apprenticeship team and come back. I know there is a lot of work that goes on. All of our schools have enterprise advisors that are people from industry working with schools in relation to supporting the curriculum design around education. There's a lot of work that the skills and employability team do working with our employers, and we have an employer group, don't we? I'm looking at Councillor Galvin because I think you sit on the skills board, don't you, Councillor? Oh, you haven't? Okay, sorry. But so we will get a report on it, and we'll ask Dan Ratcliffe, who leads that team, to come and have a talk about it here.
Can I just say, in terms of the apprenticeships programme, it is really important that we get the balance right in terms of making sure that we maintain some high expectations for all students with SEND, so they've got the menu available rather than being driven down one route. So I just want to make sure that, you know, when we're looking at the post-16 review, we're looking at it as a really its entirety, supporting students who actually do want to go down an academic pathway to then progress into university, but also acknowledging that we do need to get it right for students who may want to do something different.
And the value of that, because it got devalued.
And Councillor Jackson?
Following on nicely from that, again, I don't really think I've got a question, but it's also, I was very moved by your speech, so I felt like I had to say something. So there is apprenticeships out there. And my plea again to the council is signposting, because as a parent of children with special needs, if it hadn't have been for the Medway Parent and Carers Forum, my son wouldn't have got onto an apprenticeship with BMIX that I met at one of their, and not only did he complete that apprenticeship, and the school worked wonderfully with it, and it was very integrated. He's now been in full-time employment for 6 years, and he's carrying on doing qualifications locally with a local company that have taken him on. So, but I wouldn't have known that through the council. It's like parents and carers just signpost each other. So I feel like there should be, it would help the council if they could signpost more and it not just being left to word of mouth by parents and carers. So again, not a question, just another plea.
Thank you. Just a point. So recommendation 5 is to develop that single source of information so that all of those opportunities that are out there that people don't know about are in one place and young people can access them and see what's there. So it is in the recommendations. So
Victoria Aspin.
Thank you. I noticed that in some of your answers, well, in many of your answers, you referenced agency staff, so for the backlog of EHCP applications, EEPs. I was wondering what training's in place for them to ensure their understanding of the local landscape in Medway and align them to your core ambitions, because I know that takes a lot of capacity internally as a team to do that.
Thanks, Vicky. In terms of the agency staff, when we speak about agency staff, we're not talking about a high turnover of agency staff. We're actually talking about long-term agency staff. So when we do a contract, we're not doing it for a month, 2 months. We're actually looking ahead and making sure we've got capacity over time, particularly when we're going into the hub structure, when things change, obviously, and knowing that we've got a rise in the HCPs based on some of the funding decisions. Actually, we know that we need the extra capacity to tide that over. So when we're talking about agency, we're talking about a year-long contract or 2. In terms of the induction, they have a robust induction with a caseworker. They do shadowing. I do the induction meetings myself and make sure that actually they are aligned with the vision and values for Medway. I do all of the interviews and look over the CVs with Celia and other partners to make sure that actually we're getting the highest quality, and what we're not prepared to do is compromise and get agency workers who aren't aligned or who aren't able to work in a way that is efficient and effective. And that's, you know, one of the good things about agencies is that you can try before you buy, essentially, and you can then say cut the contract if needs be. But actually getting that induction right, as you know, working with agency workers yourself is so vital to making sure that it doesn't hinder the work, it actually adds value, and we've got a plan in place for that to happen for every agency worker that comes on site. We also have our agency signed up to our DPS, so actually they've already gone through a vetting procedure before we get CVs even. So they've kind of signed up to Medway's way of working in advance to us then asking them to send CVs over.
And then Lisa, is it Scarrett?
Nearly, Scarrett.
Sorry.
Yeah, I just really wanted to say a huge thank you to Celia and the team, because actually in the last 12 to 18 months we've had more input and support and interaction with you than ever. And I think that's made a huge impact to some of our parents. And I know that there's many that say to us, thank you for introducing us, because they've got their issue resolved straight away. And I think that is the biggest thing, and it goes back to, again, that middle management. The top are amazing. It needs to come down a bit, and hopefully that will improve. Post-16, I love the fact that they've actually listened, because actually we sat down and talked to them ourselves, and we did discuss what was going on and what wasn't. Yeah.
So that brings us to the end of that list. If there's no more questions, I'll hand over. Really quick. Really quick.
Just following on from the from Victoria Aspin, what is the cost, though, of employing such a significant number of agency staff? Because in most industries, like the one I work in, it's horrendous. I heard the benefits you said, but is it really worth the cost?
It is worth the cost to make sure that the work actually happens.
Of course, but
so
I mean, as opposed to employing staff.
But that will come. So actually what we're looking at is vacancies and filling those vacancies. So actually we're not looking at additional costing on top of that. And the way that we've done some of this work is to make sure that it's really streamlined and it's really effective, so that we've bolted bits onto some of that work to make sure that they're not covering one aspect of the work or they're doing one bit that they're wedded to for the year. Actually, we've got the mobility to move them around and make sure that actually when we are recruiting people, that they have a really well-rounded experience base to allow us to do that to a high standard. So at the moment, there are vacancies that we need to fill, and so we have to cover that cost, particularly within the EP team where we have to use locums. But going forward with the new hub system, that we're hoping to fill those vacancies, so we do end up having permanent workers.
Oh, almost sounds like apprenticeships. Thank you.
So now, if there's no more questions from anyone, I'll hand over to the Vice Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Chair. What a very interesting discussion. And I wanted to thank officers not only for the presentations, but for the thorough way in which the questions have been answered. I just wanted to briefly pick up on Councillor Peake's comments. What I thought he was going to do with Councillor Galvin was to remind him who brought in polytechnics and the Open University in the first place, which was, of course, the Harold Wilson Labour administration, and would have tied in with the 50 years ago that you... Yeah, well, if only we'd have given Councillor Galvin another 5 minutes, he might have got round to reminding us of that. But looking partly at the Leader of the Opposition, partly at the Chair and partly at the Director, a briefing note has been requested on the safety valve. I'm minded to say that, in view of officers' time, this might be best to do at a timetable that fits in with when we have to report to DFE. And therefore, I was going to propose that the briefing note be produced in consultation with the Chair, Vice Chair, spokesperson, etc., the timing of that. Yeah, okay. So I move that we note the reports on Medway Joint Local Area SEND Action Plan, the SEND Inspection Performance Update, and the Post-16 Review, and that a briefing paper come back on the safety valve operation to be timed in consultation between the Chair, Vice Chair, spokesperson and Director.
And is that seconded?
I second the motion.
And agreed? Agreed. Turn myself up. Perfect. In that case, then, if we move to the annual fostering report, which was going to be introduced by Ingrid Christen, but I believe she's ill. So Leanne Farrett.
Thank you, Chair. I'll introduce this report just briefly. It's the annual report for the Fostering Service 22-23. As the title suggests, this is a regular occurrence. Fostering is a highly regulated service. The Medway Council's fostering service provides a safe, regulated foster care placements for our children in care. And basically this report, I'm not going to go through it, I'm going to take it as being read, but this report demonstrates the extensive work that was completed by the fostering service over the last year. And basically that ensured consistent and effective scrutiny of practice and the impact that this has on Medway's children. The major priority for our fostering service, both for foster carers and supported lodging providers, is recruitment. That remains our #1 focus. And to that end, we've had investment in marketing and advertising to support the recruitment of those foster carers. And I'm going to leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
If I can open up for Councillor Peake.
So I was hesitating because I've just recently spoke. Regards to the fostering report on what I've got as page 97, I was interested to read about the amount of work that's done in the social media. These figures look very, very impressive, but I must admit I'm looking at it blind, as in I don't really know how effective this is. I just want to get a better idea how productive has this been, because the figures look good, but you know, how does it compare to other what's the word I'm looking for, please? Other councils, yeah. And also in comparison to other ways of promoting fostering. Could you give me some idea, please? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Social media is such a major aspect of our lives nowadays. There is an expectation, both in our work with foster carers and prospective foster carers, they like the use of social media. It's an effective way to get a message out there quite cheaply, but we do use other methods. We use the old-fashioned talking to people. We use billboards. We use, all sorts of methods. We use whatever it takes to make sure that we reach people who wish to or have a desire to be foster carers. We do a number of things targeting particular groups because, of course, our young people come from a variety of backgrounds. So it's ongoing, really, but social media in itself is something that most local authorities, in fact, all local authorities use now with their foster services.
And Councillor Turpin.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks, Leanne, for bringing forward this report. I had a few questions. So, one, you mentioned about sort of recruitment being a main focus, but then we read in the report that we lost all of our permanent staff in that team. So, I just wondered if there was if you'd identified any particular reasons for that, or if it was just sort of bad luck in that particular team, or whether you'd sort of, with exit surveys, you'd sort of come to a conclusion of why that might have been. On the deregistrations in 5.6.6, I just wonder if we could have sort of more data on the actual children that could have been affected by those deregistrations. So there's a breakdown of circumstances with regards to the carers, whether they were sort of retiring or that kind of detail, but there's no sort of detail about whether children were in placements at the time and whether those carers saw out their notice periods, or whether it was a very sort of abrupt end and there had to be emergency placements for children. So I just wondered if you might not be able to answer that this evening, but whether that could be, when this report comes forward again, whether we could have sort of more detail within that. Looking at 5.9.2, I don't know whether this is something that I've missed within the report, but it says of all of the children who were new entries to care during the last year, 42 children were placed with Medway foster carers, but we don't know how many new entries there were during that, like I say, unless I've missed that. So I don't know sort of 42, what that really means. And then sort of following on from that, in the table below, again, it's sort of a breakdown of in-house foster carers, and I'm sure you've sort of got the data of the 188 that are, so I'm assuming this is the total children rather than that other question was talking about new entries, but here it's sort of talking about children that are in IFAs. So again, it'd be good to see a breakdown included in this table. Again, I don't think you can answer this evening, but whether we can sort of in future see, where there's sort of the age breakdown, and then children with disability, ethnicity, whether we could see that for IFAs as well, because it could really change the data. For instance, we've got in-house foster carers, 3.6 children are under the age of 1, but what if a huge number of children are going under 1s to IFAs, and it could bring up that sort of cohort to 50%, for example. So yeah, I'm just wondering if in future, I think we might have asked this before at previous committees, whether we can have sort of a more data of the whole cohort rather than just in-house. Thank you.
Thank you. The turnover of staff, there will be a number of reasons for that. You're aware as a committee about the workforce pressures that children's have been under, and I think some of that will be reflected there. People will choose to work elsewhere for a number of reasons, closer to home, better financial reward, those sorts of things. So all of that will have come into play. There's no one reason. It has happened, and we have recruited to that team. Your question about further data, that's absolutely fine. This report is written in a particular way. As I said in the beginning, there are particular aspects of this that need to meet regulation. So it might be that we come up with some supplementaries for you if you're interested in getting underneath some of this in terms of the questions that you've raised. We can absolutely do this. But in terms of how this report is prepared, there are some things that we must show in terms of Medway Council's responsibility for children in our care. So, yeah, I'll make a note of that. I can't, you're right, I can't answer the deregulation, but I will come back to you with an answer to your question.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. I think just be helpful because obviously, you know, we're responsible for all the children, whether they're in-house Medway, you know, foster carers, or whether they're IFA. So I think it'd just be good to have more detail in it. Thank you.
Councillor Perfect.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to the Deputy Chief Executive for the report. Just the couple of points I just want to make in relation to this. A couple first, just in relation to that marketing piece that actually Councillor Peake was referencing. Just interested first, I mean, we referenced in here we're doing a lot of PPC marketing, and I appreciate this is probably going to get quite technical and be for the for the IT team or marketing team, but just how effective is that? I mean, I'd be interested, and these might be questions to take away, but I'd be very interested to know sort of what sort of response we're getting and what we sort of view as the conversion rate to this. Because I'm very conscious that quite often, you know, certainly in a commercial environment, you spend a lot of money on PPC, and sometimes the conversion rates can be exceptionally low, sometimes as low as like 0.5%. So I'd be interested to know what, you know, the money that we're spending on that, what exactly we're seeing as the return. You know, and what the cost implications are and what the sort of budgets are around that, purely for a sort of interest point to sort of see, you know, what the effectiveness of that is, and if then we could potentially be doing that for other roles around the council. You know, could the HR and recruitment teams look at, you know, maybe that example if that works well. Second one I'd be interested in is about the brand and the sort of reputation of the fostering service. I think the brand is particularly important in all of this. I know we've got lots of stuff in here about work that's gone on to develop that, bring in you know, good social media activity, but also the website, you know, demonstrate the positive aspects of fostering, etc. So I'd be interested to know, yeah, if we did any market testing on any of that before we launched it, if we're continuing to do market testing, if there's anything more we're going to do to start try and enhance that over the years ahead, because I think, you know, certainly now digital presence is becoming increasingly more important, and I know we've got here at the council the 2.0 agenda and all this sort of moving towards this really strong digital sort of ambition. So I'd be interested to know about that. Then on 5.8.1, we referenced we've got 18 LADO cases, which obviously, I know, you know, there's always a number of reasons for those, but I'd be interested to sort of know, and I know there's some reference stage 1, stage 2, but I think it would be helpful for colleagues just to understand which ones of those were taken forward, and just to explain a bit about that stage 1 and stage 2, maybe even at a very high level, because I understand, you know, we don't want to get into technicalities. And then the final point, just on the Mind Your Own, which is at 5.13.8, where we get sort of feedback from young people. What is the? Be interested to sort of note what do we aggregate any of that data? In particular, do we sort of pool any of it, and do we use it to try and improve the service generally? Because obviously we've got that direct ability for young people to communicate with us, and I just wonder if we take any of the, you know, what the usage of that app looks like, and what, you know, from a thematic perspective, are there key themes that come through that? Are there things that certain cohorts of young people are raising as concerns? We've had it for multiple years. Are there different concerns coming year to year? I just wonder, that's a very powerful, and I imagine, you know, we're paying for it, tool. And how are we sort of ensuring that we're using that data to the best effect? I don't know what the privacy policy is and if officers are even allowed to do that, but I think it would be, if we're not doing it, an interesting thing to look at, because it allows us to bring all that data together and look at it from an overall service perspective, and then plan strategy, the people strategy for the fostering department appropriately. So it brings it all together. So, yeah, but in general, I think, you know, very useful report. Thank you.
Thank you. Mariah, can I get you to deal with the PPC, please?
You can. We pay just under £20,000 a year for the PPC. Obviously, that would depend on the number of clicks we get and so on and so forth, but that's for a 12-year period. 12-month period, sorry, not 12-year.
In terms of the others, questions, brand and reputation, obviously, we're in a competitive market. IFAs, you know, are out there in the market. We work with them. We're always looking ahead, trying to see how we can can maintain advantage in that competitive market. We are a very small team, though. We really are. And our statutory responsibility is providing safe and caring homes for our children in care, number one. But our priority is around recruitment, because we obviously want more in-house foster carers in the Medway communities that mirror our communities. So we have to walk a fairly tight line on that. We don't have huge resources to compete often, but we certainly take note of what our foster carers are telling us, what our young people and children are telling us, and yes, we do aggregate as much as we can. And I think that was it in a nutshell, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think the other thing was just about the Lado cases generally. Were there any themes within those, or anything of concern to you?
It's probably best to be taken offline. What the report tells you, it gives you an overall idea. But when you're talking about small numbers,
yeah, no, I appreciate that. No, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, so it's Councillor Lammas, please.
Thank you, George. Thank you for the report. Just one question relating to foster carer recruitment activity, please. 5.55 mentions after completing the application, 11 applicants withdrew from fostering process for a variety of reasons, and it says each of these reasons are unique. And then it goes on to say later in as well, for example, 5.59, page 98, that in that cohort, 14 applicants didn't progress due to a variety of reasons, and again points on to personal circumstances. I just wonder, have you really drilled down on the reasons for that? Because my mum was a foster carer for 13 years. So I know a little bit about this industry, and it is very competitive. I'm tended to believe the fact that they might be trying to be polite in these responses when they talk about personal reasons. Are you sure that is the real reason why they've not gone ahead and become a foster carer, or are we losing them? Because I actually think, looking at the report, the way we market and actually gather interest is actually very good for a local authority. I'm just mindful that it'd be such a waste of resource if people get so close, then you lose them at the end. Is that regular in your experience? And to what extent do you believe it really is for personal reasons, or is there something we can do to go back to those people and ask them again? Did they, for example, then go on to be fostering with an agency, for example? Like, what is their current state? Thanks.
There are personal reasons why people will get through to the end stage and then decide it's not for them. And I'm pleased that happens, because it is our duty to provide safe, caring and loving homes. And if any of the adults have any reason, any doubt that this isn't the right thing for them to do, then that's the right reason. So it's difficult to really know. But people will give you different reasons. They will tell you different things, and sometimes we have to take that on face value. They may well tell us due to personal reasons, and then 2, 3, 4, 5 months later, we find they are working somewhere else, and it may be because they have a better financial reward, or they like the ethos of that independent fostering agency. We do try our best, our absolute best. We have drilled down. We do drill down, but some have decided that it just isn't for them for whatever reason they tell us. And I'll reiterate again, if that's how they feel, then that is the right decision, because they are responsible for providing caring homes for our children in care who are vulnerable. And I'm not going to rehearse that for you, because I know you know that.
Just as a follow-on, if I may, very briefly, I just wonder, you say that sometimes you find out that a few months down the line, or they've popped up somewhere else, or they obviously got them. Do you hold data on that? How do you measure for that? For example, these 11, Is it 1 or 2 that will pop up elsewhere? Is it half? Like, do you hold data on that? And is there a mechanism where you can then give them a counter-offer? For example, if 6 months later they've decided that actually fostering is for them, is there something where we go to them and say, look, we appreciate you've just signed up with this agency. We'd like you to reconsider and come to Medway. We'll pay you 10% more. Is that something that's in your power?
No, we don't poach staff from independent fostering agencies, and neither do they from us. There's sort of an unwritten rule, and there's those carers who choose to go and work elsewhere. It's not incumbent upon them to tell us who they're working for or why they're working for. It will come to us in a more casual route than that. And there's very little we can do about it. And as I said to Councillor Perfect, we are a very small team, and we have to dedicate our time and our resource to making sure that the children are cared for properly. Yeah.
If I can call Councillor Campbell, but also say that if we can try and just keep our contributions really brief and succinct, because we are running quite over.
Thank you, Chair. My question was exactly and completely articulated by Councillor Lammas, so that will keep it short. I just have a quick question on 5.6.9. 8 terminations of approval initiated by the fostering service were due to standards of care issues. I'm actually quite surprised by that, because I've got friends who are foster parents, and my understanding is that the process is incredibly rigorous, and it is not easy to be a foster parent. You have to prove that you're, and I'm glad it's rigorous, and I'm glad it's difficult and not easy. So that's 8 too many cases where the standard of care is not approved. I'm just curious, how did that get through how did that fall through the gaps? And, how did that happen? Thank you.
It may not be that it's fallen through the gaps. It may be that, we've had a lot of carers who have been approved over a number of years. Things happen, and it's our job to make sure that we find out and make sure that those standards are absolutely held high. And there may be a number of reasons for that. Yeah.
It's got to be a significant enough reason, though, to end fostering arrangement, especially when there's such a shortage. So it must be significant.
As I said, Councillor, this is a highly regulated area. Sure. So once the regulations are breached, are near to breaching, then we have a duty to act. And sometimes our foster carers themselves wish to be terminated because they want to retire or it's not for them. So in terms of the numbers that we have, 8 are too many, I agree with you, but it's not excessive. And of course we have children's changing needs over time. It may be that the needs become more challenging for those foster carers. There's a whole variety of numbers, but what I am confident about is we know when things are coming adrift, and we will act.
Councillor Goldman?
Thank you, Chair. There's 2 sides to this, isn't there? There's recruitment and there's retention. And so talk about the recruitment. Whilst it's great we're using social media and pay-per-click and all these things, but and whilst they're all very useful, I'm delighted colleague mentioned the Momo app, because when I started to chair the Transformation Board some 8 years ago, that was one of the first things that we introduced, which wasn't really anything about saving the council money. It was providing better service, and I think that was a really, really good thing to do. Is this something we could learn from our public health colleagues for recruitment? Is that any event that Medway puts on, by and large, there's some group of people there from public health with their gazebo, and they're very good at getting that message across. Is that perhaps something we, for fostering, we could piggyback on? And I was thinking particularly a little while back, we had a couple of really successful events in Chatham for the child-friendly Medway events. And on a Saturday, Chatham was absolutely packed out with people, with events going on in the Pentagon and outside. You know, if we had a stall inside or outside the Pentagon on those days, advertising the opportunities for fostering in Medway, I mean, we would have picked a few people up. So I think public health colleagues could actually help with that. The other thing is on retention. We run sports centres, we run swimming pools. Do we give them, for foster carers a discount on those sort of things? You know, if we could offer them, half price swimming or higher sports facilities or something. It's just so, it would be a cost-effective way, because it's within the council's gift to do those sort of things. It would be a very cost-effective way of showing our appreciation, because, fostering, from what I understand, is not an easy thing by any stretch of the imagination. People will find times when they struggle, times when it's brilliant, I suppose, and everything's going well. There's other times when it's all going wrong. If you just feel you're appreciated, you're getting a bit of love back from the council's not just giving money, but it's also supporting other ways. If we could offer things like cheaper swimming, sports and that, just to show that we appreciate it. I know sometimes colleagues on that sort of leisure side will balk at saying, well, how's this going to be funded? But I think we've got to look at the bigger picture here on that. So that's something I perhaps, we could explore outside of this.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm grateful for those ideas. I know there is a lot of work going on in terms of retaining our foster carers. And I'm going to draw on my finance colleague there, Mariah, because some of it is financial, and we have done a piece of work recently. And Samuel, do you want to talk about our work with IFAs, etc., these are the people who do the work, so I'll let them speak.
Okay, so you may remember last year or just before, we actually increased our offer to our in-house fostering. One of the first offers we put onto the table was a discounted price for adult education, with the understanding that we'd look to expand them to our leisure centres, to arts and so on and so forth. So they're in the process of being looked at, shall we say. And in terms of your public health, yes, that's already being discussed within the management team. We've picked up on that, and that is something we're looking to take forward.
Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to elaborate a little more. We work closely with the Independent Fostering Agency Forum, so it's the surrounding areas and Medway and the independent providers to compare marketing strategies and referrals into the service. So we have similar figures, but obviously I don't have those figures with me, I'm afraid, to share. But just to say that we have a similar marketing strategy with our in-house fostering service to those independent fostering agencies, and that is majority focused on social media at the moment because we see the results from that.
Right, so I think everyone that wanted to speak has at least spoke once, so I thought I'd squeeze my questions in now. So the first one was mostly covered by Councillor Lammas, but do we know why people transfer to an IFA, and then what support, if any, do they still then receive from us? And how much say do children get in whether they have a foster placement or a children's home? And then when it comes to then moving on from foster placements, how is it decided when that readiness is? Because I read about supported lodgings, but who decides when that lodging is going to come to an end, and how much say do the children get over that? And then the last one was something I think we spoke about a few times throughout the month, but from a planning point of view, what do we look from both a foster and a children's home? Because I know there were some issues on a planning committee recently, so I just want to know what we need from the building and whether we can maybe give planning some training on that as well.
I'll answer that one first. Yes, absolutely. We come at it from a different point of view. we come at it from what the child needs, and that's done off the back of an assessment. And, you know, we may call on other professionals to help us with that, but the care plan itself drives those decisions. So it's not like we have a child come into our care and let's put them here or let's put them there. The assessment is done, and then we understand the needs of that child, and they will have the best form of care, whether that's foster carers, whether it's residential, to meet those needs. So you come at it from that way around, not the other way of, well, we've got a residential home here, how many children can we fit into that home? It doesn't work like that. It starts with the child themselves and what their needs are. Some have absolutely complex needs, so it may be a mixture. It may start off with fostering, that despite the best will in the world, that fostering placement may break down. Through further assessment, etc., it might be that child or young person is deemed as needing residential, and then we have to find the right residential to meet the needs. So it's very, very complex. But Sam, do you want to answer the other bit around IFA and?
Yeah, of course. So there are a number of reasons somebody may transfer to an independent fostering agency, and some of those could be around the carer's development. They may wish to specialise in caring for a certain criteria or an age of a child, and there are agencies out there that would specialise in that. There are obviously some that may transfer due to financial reasons or moving locations, so they may move out of area, and obviously we support our children in Medway, so we typically have carers that live in the Medway and surrounding areas, but not too far. But those reasons, I suppose, are unique to the individual carers themselves. Quite often they may retire, which is, I think, probably one of our highest percentages.
Thank you both. And Councillor Peake.
Just had a point of clarification. You asked about guidance for planning matters with regards to approving buildings, is that right? Yes. At yesterday's planning committee, it was explained by Dave Harris that in that capacity we have no involvement or duty to judge the appropriateness of a property, and that is entirely done by Ofsted. So we don't have to worry about that at all when it comes to planning. We're just approving the suitability of the building, almost as if like we don't even have to care about what the building is used for, basically. That's what he explained yesterday, so I don't know if that's helpful.
We're digressing, but I'm not sure I understand, because, like, how do you approve a building as suitable for a children's home if you don't know? If you're approving a building for a change of use, I think this might need to go back to you.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I was just wondering, sort of jump in. I wondered, Leanne, if there might be a possibility of a bit of a session with members on this, just to explain this process, because I know I did catch a bit of the planning committee yesterday, and I know we discussed it, I think, at the pre-meeting we discussed this. And there is a bit of confusion. Obviously, the chief planning officer's talking from a planning perspective and a planning policy perspective. But I think it would be useful just for a bit of clarity on that point, because I know there's been a lot of back and forth, and there's members on this side, and I know members on that side that have also got those sort of concerns. And I know that the chair's making those very clear there. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Chair, it is my intention to have that training, because currently there is a lot of confusion out there about what roles, etc., etc. It will be down to Ofsted to register that or agree that property should be used as a children's home. Quite tight regulation again, and then there is the planning, which members obviously have a role in. So we will be offering an opportunity to discuss that so people understand their roles.
Yeah, if we just come in there. Planning is very specific, and I think all of us have sat on the planning committee are all guilty of trying to bring in non-planning issues, and the officers have to steer us away from that. So I think we all have to be very, very careful of that. And it's surprising actually how narrow the actual planning side actually is. And And when you read people's objections to a certain plan, probably 90% of them are not planning matters. So it is so I think, Leanne, you're right, training on that would be very, very helpful for all of us.
Okay, and Councillor Peake now.
Okay, two questions, opposite sides of the coin. Referring to 5.8, allegations, quality of care complaints, 5.81, referred to 18 carers were reported to the local authority designated officer, the LADO, I like that. To give that some kind of flesh to it, 18, that seems like a very small number. So, I mean, hopefully this indicates an authority that gives enough support to people that they don't need to then to be reported on. How does it compare to other authorities? That's what I'm trying to get the flesh around that. Is 18, I mean, presumably there's hundreds and hundreds of people that do foster caring, so that it seems to be commendably a small number. Is that the case? The other side of the coin, unlike a couple of my colleagues, I've never done fostering, but I have a cousin that has fostered all her life. Bear in mind, she likes a good old mowing up. I remember her many times, this is not Medway, by the way, as a long-term foster carer, she would quite often complain about the lack of support from the authority. A lot of young people that who are in foster care have come from some kind of emotionally challenging background. There she is as a very experienced foster carer. So she's not, she's skilled in what she's doing, if you like, still finding the need to moan about the lack of support that she thought that she should get from authority. So my question to you, in your estimate, how good do you think you are at providing support to the actual foster parent, please? Thank you.
The latter question, we are pretty robust. That's a fairly reasonable number. I don't know off the top of my head about a comparison to other local authorities, because we would need to look at our statistical neighbours. It's no use, for example, me comparing 18 in Medway to 18 in Kent. It's apples and pears. So I will find that out for you. But 18 is a reasonable number. We're very robust around that area. Yes, most of the children who find themselves needing a caring, loving foster home will have experienced trauma. It is extremely traumatic for children to leave their birth family. It is the right decision, but it's still fairly traumatic. There are attachments that those children have to their birth parents or birth parent. So, yeah, it is traumatic. We do, and you will have seen this report, gives you a fairly clear idea about the level of support that we give to our foster carers, and it is actually tailored. It's what I was saying before. Each child will have an individual care plan that we need to manage to ensure that that child is safe in the first instance, but also has permanence as soon as they can. Are they returning to their birth family? Are they staying in long-term fostering? Are they being adopted? All of those questions need to be asked. So we do our best, councillor, but our foster carers are the best ones to ask that question to, I would suggest.
Okay, I was going to say, obviously the children come first, but I was particularly asking about supporting the carer, the foster parent, what support you give. I'm sorry if it's in the report and I've missed it, I apologise.
Perhaps we could pick it up offline, councillor. I mean, I'm giving you an assurance that our foster carers are well supported. Thank you.
Councillor Turpin?
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I just wanted to go back to Councillor Campbell's point about the deregistrations by the foster service. I mean, because I sit on the fostering panel, so I sort of kind of see some of these coming through, and I just kind of just reassurance, I guess, that they're needed. But I just wondered with the numbers, because it does seem high and it's a concern, but I don't know whether say it's been initiated by a social worker and there's reports. Sometimes, in my experience, sometimes the foster carers don't then engage with that process. And so there can be learning that takes place. So it's not a case of the standards of care, that's it, you're sacked kind of thing. There is a process that goes through, so they will try and resolve those issues when there's been standards of care, but sometimes the carers just don't want to engage, and it can be for various reasons. It might be that they just find it too upsetting or whatever. So if they then sort of don't engage, and then obviously it falls, they have to then be deregistered because there's not a lot you can do if someone's not communicating with you. I assume it would still fall within that sort of figure of the social worker sort of initiating it, whereas actually you could sort of say it's the foster carer in a way, so it's a bit of it could sort of force that number up, couldn't it?
You're correct. I mean, you know, the deregistration will happen. It may happen. It's not a black and white process, and your narrative has been very helpful to, I think, give other members an idea about some of the complexities, not only with the foster carers and their life and their own family and what's going on, but also our children and meeting their needs. So you're correct.
Yeah, I just wanted to give some reassurance, really, that it's not sort of a very straightforward process. There is lots of, you know, there is a lot of work going on to try and keep those foster carers on board, basically. Yeah.
And Councillor, go on. You ready?
Just firstly, focusing on some of the positives. I would like to congratulate the small team for achieving the success rate in terms of permanence, achieving permanency with special guardians as well as long-term foster carers and also connected carers. I think that is commendable given the size of the team that we're hearing about. I suppose some of what I think is missing is the percentage of staying put amongst the numbers that have been put, but I look forward to having that information from the fostering team regardless. With regards to the permanency review, PPM meetings, permanency planning review meetings, I know that the Children in Care Service used to hold that quite regularly. Whether or not that has been ongoing, I'm not aware of, but I would like assurance that it is happening because it is very important to review the permanency planning because things change. Foster carers' views change, other circumstances change as well. I think with regards to the earlier argument about when standards of care are poor and is not improving, then I completely agree that, you know, we must have high expectations from our carers for our children, and where it is completely appropriate that deregistration should take place despite all measures not bringing forth any productive results, then I think that is the right course of action, which I would be in support of. I just wanted to ask also if, with regards to the retention and recruitment, I'm aware, I work with lots of local authorities, so I'm aware of the huge pressure nationally in terms of finding and retaining foster carers. But when it comes to Medway Council, are you conducting exit interviews to see if there are any lessons learned, if there's any reflective learning, and if there has been a ripple effect of the shortage of children in care social worker, because that's part of the support network for the foster carers as well, and whether or not it's due to the referrals also reflecting the actual level of needs of children. Sometimes foster carers do say that the referrals do not reflect the child's level of complexity. Also, when there are allegations or ladder referrals, whether there's appropriate level of support for foster carers, independent support as well as peer support. And finally, with regards to somewhat, I think Councillor Galvin mentioning about other local authorities having initiatives for foster carers. For example, during holidays, I'm aware that some local authorities provide holiday activity coupons or a leisure centre pass, things like that. And I think you have touched on it briefly. And I'm glad to hear that you are exploring those options as well. But I think it is a whole host of contributory factors rather than one-off factor that I believe. But I think wherever we can learn from those that are leaving the fostering service, are you conducting exit interviews to capture what lessons can be learned? And of course, like when things are raw, they might not give us the exact reasons. I get that.
Yeah,
but I think finally, because I'm aware that some fostering agencies are very successful in recruiting new foster carers through word of mouth. I know we've heard a lot about social media, but sometimes the most effective ways of recruiting is through word of mouth, because people hear that there is good service and they want to join that part of the support network. So how effective are we in Medway in doing that?
Thank you, Councillor. And you've done a fairly good gallop of all the different variables that come to play in this. But I would like to say to you, yes, we're doing exit interviews. You've hit the nail on the head. Really, really important to understand why our foster carers are choosing to exit. And I've already rehearsed, sometimes it's personal reasons, sometimes it'll be for more financial reward elsewhere, and all of those things in the middle. But yes, you can be assured we are doing exit interviews. Permanency planning, we do that weekly. We have a tracker that's regularly overseen by managers. You'll be aware that we had Ofsted with us 3 weeks previous, and while the results, the judgment is embargoed until the 11th of September, I can assure you that Ofsted looked at what we were doing, and the results will be imminent, but I am assured that all the things that you've spoken about are happening. Rewards, sometimes we do holiday and support offers, accessing groups, all of those things we do. And we certainly don't use social media as our only form of tool for recruitment. I did say in the beginning, those conversations with foster carers, they sell it better than I ever could, better than a social media advert ever could. It's that personalised, and we're doing a lot of that with different communities. We have children and young people from different ethnic backgrounds, and it's important that they are recognised and safe and secure in loving homes in Medway, and that will be sometimes with members of their own community. So it's trying to use a whole different raft of recruitment. Yeah. Thank you.
Following on from the thing about holiday vouchers and things, wondered if it's been considered about foster parents being able to access the HAF thing. I know it's got specific funding, but I don't know if it's something that outside of here could just be considered. But outside of that, that's everyone on my list. So if there's no one else that indicates now, then I'll hand over to the Vice Chairman. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much, Chair. Another very interesting discussion. It hasn't escaped my attention, nor probably other members' attention, how a lot of these issues on the agenda tonight are linked up. We spoke earlier about the importance of support for young people post-16 and the value of foster carers giving that extra stability and support, and perhaps helping them with the difficult life choices as they move on to leave care. Can't be underestimated, the value of our foster carers. So with that, Chair, I simply want to move that we note the Fostering Service Annual Report as set out at Appendix 1.
Okay, and is that seconded?
I second.
And agreed? Agreed. Oh, perfect. In that case, that brings us on to the work programme, which will be introduced by Stephanie.
I don't actually have anything to add, Chairperson. I take the report as read. The only point that I will raise is in terms of the recommendation for suggestion regarding items for the task and finish group. I would ask that members do put their suggestions forward through their groups to the Vice Chair, the opposition spokes, and that will be discussed in conjunction with the Director.
Okay, was there any debate on the work programme? Councillor Perfect?
Yeah, there's not really a debate. I just wanted to note a couple of points, if I could, Stephanie. I think important in a public sense, particularly because obviously we've got ILACs on the October meeting. I just want to, I think, and I spoke with Leader of the Opposition and other opposition spokes, frontbench colleagues earlier, just about this and wider colleagues within the opposition. I think we're very keen, certainly noting that the next meeting, just to ensure that there's sufficient time to discuss that. And I know I'll raise that at the meeting that we have with the chair and with you as well, Stephanie. Just about it, but I think it's important that the committee notes in a public way the importance of that report and the gravity in which it must be read. Certainly in conjunction with the guidance given by the DfE. So I just wanted to note that. And then just more generally, I think it's really good. I think the thematic approach is working. I think certainly talking to colleagues, I know it's been well received, and I'm just talking to colleagues just now, and people that it's really working from a sense of allowing us to take items together and in conjunction. So I think that's really positive. And just finally, I think it's really good to see the portfolio holder here. I think myself and Councillor Golvin noted that, and thank you, Vice Chair, because I know this is your second meeting. You stepped into the chair, and I know you've done a great job. So thank you very much. Yeah, happy to support. Thank you.
Can I just say I think too that the thematic approach we're taking to children's overview and scrutiny is working for officers as well. The depth and quality of the conversation is giving us, in terms of our day job, the information we need, very good ideas, so I concur.
And just to say that there will be another data workshop prior to this meeting, which I'm still trying to finalise a date. September seems to be really busy for me to try and pinpoint a date that will be suitable for members, but I am hoping that everybody will be able to attend because they are really valuable, the data workshops.
I was just going to add as well, I think, Leanne, I don't know whether ahead of that we might want to look at a briefing, and I appreciate this is a bit weird, but briefing colleagues actually on the inspection framework around ILACs, just so that members actually understand some of the details, because I know some colleagues in particular have got good understanding of the Ofsted framework and how that ILACs inspection would have happened. But I do wonder if it might be good, not a particularly lengthy session, but just explaining how that will and what the report will then look like, just to allow us, when we go into that scrutiny discussion, to keep it very much at a sort of approach. And I imagine you've probably already had that discussion, so I can see lots of people smiling, which is good.
That is one of the things that will happen at the data workshop. That's why it's really important that people do attend if they're able to attend.
Everyone on this side will be here. I can assure you everyone will be there, otherwise they'll be in big trouble. I'll say that publicly, so thank you. Thanks, everybody.
If I could just say, I thought the data workshop was very, very useful, and it was very well done. I'm surprised how much I surprised myself how much I learned. I think so.
That was all down to Celia. Thank you, Celia, for arranging it.
Does anyone else want to come in on the work programme? No? Then I shall hand over to the Vice Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Galvin.
Sorry, Councillor Jones, before you go on. just to let the committee know that the data workshops are going to be ongoing, so we are hoping to hold one ahead of every formal meeting. So obviously the next one will be on social care and the ILACs inspection, and the one after that, I believe Mariah will be offering something on the funding formula, and it's really important that people do attend that one as well, because you get to understand. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, to the committee clerk for that intervention, and thanks to Councillor Galvin for emphasising the importance of lifelong learning. So, with that, the Children and Young People Overview and Scrutiny Committee is asked to note the report and agree the work programme as set out at Appendix 1 to the report, subject to accepting the proposed changes outlined in italic text on Appendix 1. The committee is asked to identify up to 2 potential task group topics for consideration at a meeting of Overview and Scrutiny Committee chairpersons, vice chairpersons and opposition spokespersons.
Is that seconded?
I second.
And agreed? Agreed. Perfect. Then that would, I think, draw us to a close.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you all. Thank you.